The vase shattered against the brick wall with a violence that made the air itself seem to flinch. Charlotte Vance stood in the ruins of someone else's life, chest heaving, perfectly manicured hands still trembling from what she'd just done. Across the destroyed flower shop, amid the scattered petals and broken stems, a middle-aged man in a worn apron simply knelt and began picking up the pieces. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't even look at her. That silence, that unshakable dignity, would haunt her within hours when she discovered the impossible truth. This man, this obstacle she'd just humiliated, had once saved her mother's life with his own blood. Before we begin, I want to invite you to join me on this journey. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's step into Ethan's world. The morning light filtered through the front windows of Cole's Flowers with the kind of golden gentleness that only comes in early spring. Dust motes danced in the beams, suspended like tiny stars above rows of tulips, daffodils, and hyacinths arranged in mismatched ceramic pots. The shop was small, barely 20 feet wide, wedged between a Lebanese bakery and a shuttered bookstore on Merchants Row, a street that time and progress had quietly forgotten. Ethan Cole stood behind the wooden counter his grandfather had built in 1962, his hands working with practiced efficiency as he trimmed the stems of white roses. He was 46, lean and weathered in the way of men who work with their hands, with gray threading through his dark hair and permanent creases at the corners of his eyes. Those eyes, a striking pale blue, carried the particular kind of sadness that comes not from bitterness, but from having loved deeply and lost completely. "Dad, you're doing that thing again." He looked up. His daughter Maya stood in the doorway to the back room, backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression caught between amusement and exasperation. She was 15, all sharp angles and unfinished beauty, with her mother's dark hair in his eyes. "What thing?" Ethan asked. "The thing where you get lost in the flowers and forget the rest of the world exists." She walked over and kissed his cheek. "I'm heading to school." "Wait." He set down the shears and reached under the counter, pulling out a small bouquet of forget-me-nots wrapped in brown paper. "For Mrs. Jameson, tell her thank you for the extra tutoring." Maya took the flowers, her expression softening. "You know she's not going to accept payment, which is exactly why I'm sending flowers." She shook her head, smiling now. "You're impossible." "That's what your mother always said." The words hung in the air for a moment, familiar and comfortable. 3 years since Sarah's death, and they'd learned to speak her name without drowning in the grief. It was there, always, a permanent ache beneath everything, but it no longer consumed them. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, sweetheart. Have a good day." The bell above the door chimed as Maya left, and Ethan returned to his roses. The shop was quiet except for the old radio on the shelf playing something classical he didn't recognize. This was his world now, simple, predictable, anchored in the routine of opening at 7, arranging flowers until noon, handling the occasional customer, closing at 6. Some might call it small. Ethan called it enough. He'd inherited the shop from his father, who'd inherited it from his father before him. 3 generations of Cole men had stood behind this counter, had learned the language of flowers, had marked the city's moments of joy and sorrow with carefully chosen blooms. Ethan could still remember being 7 years old, watching his grandfather's thick fingers move with surprising delicacy as he created a bridal bouquet, explaining in his gruff voice that every flower carried meaning, that arrangement was a form of communication older than words. The shop had changed little since those days. The same pressed tin ceiling, now stained with age. The same hardwood floors, worn smooth by decades of footsteps. The same hand-painted sign above the door, Cole's Flowers. Established 1962, though the paint had faded until the letters were barely legible. Ethan had been meaning to repaint it for years. Somehow, he never quite got around to it. The morning passed slowly, as mornings usually did. Old Mr. Chen came in at 8:30 for his weekly carnations, the ones he took to his wife's grave every Friday. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped by at 9 for a bouquet of sunflowers. No particular reason, she just liked having fresh flowers in her kitchen. By 10, Ethan had sold exactly $43 worth of inventory and felt content with that modest success. He He was rearranging the window display when the black Mercedes pulled up outside. It was wrong for this street. Too sleek, too expensive, too aggressively modern. The door opened and a woman emerged, and she was equally wrong for this street. Late 30s, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, heels that clicked against the sidewalk with the sharp precision of a metronome. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that suggested control, and she moved with the particular confidence of someone accustomed to doors opening before she reached them. She pushed through the entrance, and the bell's cheerful chime sounded almost apologetic. Ethan looked up from the bird of paradise he was unwrapping. "Good morning. Can I help you find something?" The woman's gaze swept across the shop with an expression that suggested she was performing a calculation. When her eyes finally settled on Ethan, they were sharp and assessing. "Mr. Cole?" "That's right." "Charlotte Vance." She didn't offer her hand. "I'm the Senior Vice President of Development for Meridian Properties. Do you have a few minutes to discuss a business proposition?" Something in Ethan's chest tightened, though his face remained calm. He'd heard the name Meridian Properties before. Everyone on Merchants Row had. They were the ones buying up the neighborhood, block by block, transforming it into something shiny and unrecognizable. "I'm happy to listen," he said carefully. Charlotte pulled a folder from her leather bag and set it on the counter. "I'll be direct, Mr. Cole. Meridian is developing a luxury mixed-use property on this street. We've already acquired every building in this block except one." She tapped the folder with one manicured finger. "Yours." Ethan opened the folder. Inside was an offer letter, dense with legal language, but the number at the bottom was clear enough. $850,000. He looked up. "That's generous." "It's more than generous. It's nearly double the assessed property value." Charlotte's voice carried the practiced smoothness of someone who'd given this speech before. "The building is old, the location is decent but not prime, and frankly, the business itself generates minimal revenue. This is an exceptional offer." Ethan closed the folder and slid it back across the counter. "I appreciate you coming by, Ms. Vance, but I'm not interested in selling." For a moment, Charlotte simply stared at him, as if he'd spoken in a language she didn't understand. "I'm sorry? The shop's not for sale." "Mr. Cole, perhaps you didn't see the amount." "I saw it." "Then you understand that this is a life-changing sum of money. You could relocate anywhere, start fresh, secure your daughter's future." "My daughter's future is secure," Ethan interrupted gently. "And this shop is her inheritance, just like it was mine. Some things aren't about money." Charlotte's expression hardened slightly, the professional warmth cooling into something more calculating. "Mr. Cole, I understand sentimental attachment. I really do. But sentiment doesn't pay the bills. This neighborhood is changing whether you participate or not. In 2 years, this street will be transformed, and your shop will be surrounded by development. You'll be an island in the middle of progress. Then I'll be an island. That's not sustainable." "Maybe not." Ethan returned to his bird of paradise, carefully peeling back the protective plastic. "But it's my choice." He could feel Charlotte's frustration radiating across the counter like heat. When she spoke again, her voice had an edge. "There are other ways to approach this, Mr. Cole. Legal mechanisms, eminent domain, zoning changes, code violations." "Are you threatening me, Miss Vance?" "I'm explaining reality." She picked up her folder. "This project is happening. We have investors, city approval, and a timeline. You're a single obstacle, and obstacles get removed. I'm offering you the chance to do this the easy way, to walk away with enough money to build something better somewhere else." Ethan set down the bird of paradise and looked at her directly. There was no anger in his eyes, but there was something immovable, something that Charlotte would later remember as unsettlingly calm. "I'm sure you have deadlines and investors and important people waiting for answers," he said quietly. "But this shop is all I have left of my father and my grandfather. It's where my daughter learned to walk, where my wife and I used to sit after closing and plan our future. It's small, and it's old, and it probably doesn't make sense to someone like you, but it's mine. And I'm not selling it. Not for $850,000, not for twice that. Not ever." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Charlotte's jaw tightened, and for a moment something raw flashed across her face. Anger, certainly, but also something that looked almost like incomprehension, as if she'd encountered a species of thinking she'd forgotten existed. "You're making a mistake," she said finally. That's my right." Charlotte turned and walked to the door, her heels clicking against the old floorboards. She paused with her hand on the handle. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Cole. This conversation isn't over." "Actually," Ethan said, "it is." The door closed behind her, and the bell chimed its farewell. Ethan stood in the sudden quiet, his hands resting on the counter, and realized they were shaking slightly. He took a slow breath, then another, letting the familiar sense of soil and flowers ground him. The shop felt smaller somehow, as if Charlotte Vance's presence had compressed the walls. Ethan looked around at the crowded shelves, the mismatched pots, the faded photographs on the wall, showing 3 generations of Cole men standing in this exact spot. His grandfather, stern and solid. His father, smiling beside a young Ethan. And then Ethan and Sarah on their wedding day, surrounded by white roses. "Not selling," he said quietly to the empty room. "Not ever." That evening, Ethan closed the shop at 6 as always, sweeping the floor and wiping down the counter before locking up. He walked the 4 blocks to Oakwood Academy, where Maya was waiting outside the main building with a cluster of friends. When she saw him, she said her goodbyes and jogged over. "Good day?" he asked. "The usual, chemistry test, drama rehearsal, Sophia being Sophia." She fell into step beside him. "How about you?" Considered telling her about Charlotte Vance and the offer, but decided against it. No point worrying her over something that was already settled. Quiet, sold some flowers, arranged some bouquets, the usual. They walked home through the lengthening shadows, past the Lebanese bakery where Mr. Kassab was closing his shutters, past the shuttered bookstore with its dusty windows, past the small park where homeless men congregated around the broken fountain. This was their neighborhood, shabby and forgotten, but familiar. Their apartment was above the shop, accessed by a narrow staircase at the back. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in, a living room where the couch sagged in the middle. Sarah had decorated it with yard sale finds and optimism, and Ethan had left everything exactly as she'd arranged it. Maya headed straight for her room while Ethan started dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and the tomato sauce Sarah had taught him to make, with garlic and basil and a splash of wine. They ate at the small table by the window, and Maya talked about her chemistry test and whether Mr. Patterson was finally going to cast the spring musical. "He said he's deciding this week," she said, twirling pasta around her fork. "Emma thinks she's getting the lead, but I don't know. She can't hit the high notes in the finale." "And you can?" She grinned. "Obviously." After dinner, Maya disappeared to her room to do homework while Ethan washed dishes and tried not to think about Charlotte Vance. He failed, of course. Her words kept circling back. "This neighborhood is changing whether you participate or not. You're an island in the middle of progress." Maybe she was right. Maybe he was being stubborn and foolish, clinging to something that didn't matter to anyone but him. Maybe his daughter would be better off with that money, with opportunities he could never provide on a florist's income. But then he thought about his grandfather's hands, teaching him the difference between a spray and a bouquet. His father's voice, explaining that running a business wasn't about profit margins, it was about showing up every day and being part of the community's fabric. Sarah's laugh, echoing through the shop after they'd closed, when they danced to the radio among the flowers. Some things weren't for sale, some things mattered more than money. Ethan dried his hands and went to knock on Maya's door. "Yeah?" she called. "Just wanted to say goodnight." She opened the door, standing there in her pajamas with her textbook still open on her bed. "You okay, Dad?" "I'm fine. Just wanted to tell you I love you." Maya studied him for a moment with those blue eyes that saw more than he sometimes wanted her to see. Then she hugged him, quick and fierce. "Love you too," she said. The next morning, Ethan opened the shop at 7 as always. The world outside was gray and drizzling, and Merchants Row looked even more forlorn than usual, puddles gathering in the cracked sidewalk. He made coffee in the back room and started the day's work, processing a delivery of orchids, preparing arrangements for a corporate client's lobby, deadheading the roses in the window display. At 8:30, Mr. Chen didn't come in for his carnations. That was unusual. In the 3 years since Ethan had taken over the shop full-time, Mr. Chen had never missed a Friday. Ethan wrapped the carnations anyway and set them aside, figuring the old man would show up eventually. At 9, Mrs. Rodriguez didn't come in for her sunflowers. By 9:30, Ethan was standing at the window, looking out at the empty street with a strange, crawling unease. The bakery's lights were on. Mr. Kassab was there. He could see him moving behind the counter. But something felt wrong. The Mercedes pulled up at 10. This time, Charlotte Vance wasn't alone. A man emerged from the passenger seat, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive suit and the kind of bland expression that suggested he was paid to not have opinions. He held an umbrella over Charlotte as she walked to the shop entrance. Ethan met them at the door. "Mr. Cole," Charlotte said. "This is my attorney, David Brennan. May we come in?" "No." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "We concluded our business yesterday, Ms. Vance. I don't see any reason to continue the discussion." "I think you'll want to hear what we have to say." "I really won't." Charlotte's smile had all the warmth of a February wind. "Mr. Cole, we've done some research. Your building has several code violations. The electrical system is outdated, the plumbing doesn't meet current standards, and the fire escapes haven't been inspected in over a decade. We've also discovered that your business license was issued under your father's name and was never properly transferred after his death." Ethan's hands tightened on the doorframe. "That's a clerical error." "Perhaps, but it's also a violation that could result in immediate closure until it's resolved. These things can take months to work through the bureaucracy." She paused. "Unless, of course, we reach an understanding. This is extortion. This is business." Charlotte pulled another folder from her bag. "We're prepared to increase our offer to $950,000. In exchange, you transfer the property within 30 days, and we handle all the code compliance issues ourselves. Walk away clean, Mr. Cole. Walk away rich." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something that made his chest ache. Not cruelty, exactly. More like a fundamental absence. A place where empathy should exist but had been systematically removed, replaced with efficiency and calculation. She wasn't evil, she was just empty. "No," he said quietly. Charlotte's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Mr. Cole, I said no. Now please leave my property." He closed the door and turned the lock. Through the glass, he watched Charlotte say something to her attorney. The man shrugged. They returned to the Mercedes and drove away, leaving Ethan standing in his shop with his heart pounding and his mind racing. The threats were real. He knew that. Charlotte Vance wasn't bluffing. She had the resources and the ruthlessness to make his life extraordinarily difficult. But what choice did he have? Surrender something that meant everything because a developer wanted it? His phone rang. It was Maya's school. "Mr. Cole, this is Principal Harrison. I'm afraid we need to discuss Maya's tuition. Our records show you're 3 months behind on payments, and—" "I'll take care of it," Ethan interrupted. "I'm sorry. There was a mix-up with my bank. I'll have a check to you by Monday." He hung up and sat down heavily on the stool behind the counter. 3 months behind. He'd known the shop was struggling, had known the margins were thin, but somehow he'd convinced himself it was temporary, that things would turn around. Maybe Charlotte was right. Maybe he was making a mistake. The bell chimed. Ethan looked up, expecting Charlotte's return, but instead saw Mr. Chen shuffling through the door. "Mr. Chen, I was worried about you." The old man waved dismissively. "Doctor's appointment, running late." He pointed at the carnations Ethan had wrapped earlier. "Those for me?" "Always." Mr. Chen paid, then lingered at the counter. "Saw a fancy car outside earlier, black Mercedes." "Real estate developers," Ethan said. "They want to buy the building." "You selling?" "No." Mr. Chen nodded slowly. "Good. This street needs places like this, places that remember." He picked up his carnations. "My wife, she loved this shop. Said your grandfather had the best roses in the city. When she got sick, she made me promise I'd keep coming here, keep bringing her flowers, even after—" He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Anyway, some things are worth keeping." After he left, Ethan sat in the quiet shop and thought about worth, about value, about the difference between price and meaning. The rain continued to fall. The weekend passed in a blur of arrangements and customers and the ordinary rhythm of work. Maya seemed to sense something was wrong. She was quieter than usual, watching him with concerned eyes. But Ethan maintained the facade that everything was fine. On Sunday, they went to the cemetery as they did every month, bringing fresh flowers for Sarah's grave. Mom would tell you to take the money, Maya said as they stood looking at the headstone. Ethan glanced at her. I thought you didn't know. I'm 15, Dad, not blind. A woman in a $1,000 suit doesn't visit a flower shop to buy roses. She knelt and arranged the bouquet in the vase. So what are you going to do? Keep the shop. Even if it means She stopped. Even if it means what? Maya stood, brushing dirt from her knees. Nothing. Forget it. But Ethan knew what she'd been about to say. Even if it means we keep struggling. Even if it means you can't afford my tuition. Even if it means we barely get by, month after month, year after year. Your mother, he said carefully, believed some things mattered more than comfort. She believed in legacy, in continuity, in showing up for the people and places that need you. He reached out and took Maya's hand. She would tell me to do what I thought was right, and this is right. Maya squeezed his hand. Okay, Dad. Okay. Okay. She smiled, and it was Sarah's smile, bright and fierce. We'll figure it out. We always do. Walking back to the car, Ethan felt something settle in his chest, a kind of peace, or maybe just acceptance. Whatever happened next, at least he'd know he hadn't betrayed the things that mattered. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. Ethan opened the shop, made his coffee, and began the week's work. At 9:15, a city inspector showed up with a clipboard and a serious expression. Routine inspection, he said, though his eyes suggested otherwise. He spent 2 hours examining every corner of the shop, marking violations on his form. Outdated electrical panel. Insufficient fire suppression. Improper ventilation in the storage area. Inadequate handicap accessibility. By the time he finished, he'd documented 17 separate violations. You'll receive a formal notice within 3 business days, he said. You have 30 days to remediate or face closure. After he left, Ethan sat at the counter and calculated. Fixing everything would cost somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. He had $800 in his business account and maybe $3,000 in savings. The bell chimed. This time it wasn't Charlotte Vance. It was a woman in her late 60s, elegant and poised, with silver hair and kind eyes. She looked around the shop with an expression of curious appreciation. What a lovely place, she said. Thank you. Can I help you find something? Actually, I'm looking for the owner. Ethan Cole? That's me. She smiled and extended her hand. Helen Vance, Charlotte's mother. Ethan shook her hand, caught off guard. I wasn't expecting you. I imagine not. Helen walked over to examine a display of tulips. My daughter told me about your conversation. She's quite frustrated, you know. Charlotte doesn't handle rejection well. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be. Helen turned to face him. She needs to be told no more often. It's good for her character. She paused. Though I should warn you, she won't give up easily. Charlotte sees the world in terms of problems and solutions, and she's convinced you're a problem that needs solving. Why are you telling me this? Because I disagree with her. Helen pulled a business card from her purse and set it on the counter. That's my personal number. If she escalates beyond what's reasonable, and knowing Charlotte, she might, call me. I can't control my daughter, but I can sometimes redirect her enthusiasm. Ethan picked up the card. Why would you help me? Because I grew up in a neighborhood like this one, before it was renovated, before it was saved, back when it was just streets full of small shops run by people who cared more about community than profit. Helen's eyes grew distant. My father owned a hardware store. 3 generations, just like your flower shop. Then the developers came with their offers and their threats, and one by one, everyone sold. Everyone except my father. What happened? They made his life hell. Inspections, permit denials, mysterious break-ins. He held on for 2 years before the stress literally killed him. Heart attack at 56. She looked at Ethan. I don't want that to happen to you. So you're saying I should sell? I'm saying you should be careful. Know what you're up against. Helen moved toward the door, then paused. Charlotte is brilliant and ruthless, and utterly convinced that her vision of progress is the only one that matters. She doesn't see people like you as individuals with legitimate concerns. She sees obstacles. I understand. Do you? Helen's expression was kind but serious. Because I suspect you're the type of man who believes that integrity and principle are enough. They're not, Mr. Cole. Not against someone like my daughter. She has money, lawyers, connections, and an absolute certainty that what she's doing is right. Ethan met her gaze. Then I guess we'll see what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Helen smiled sadly. That's what I'm afraid of. After she left, Ethan stood in the quiet shop and felt the weight of what was coming. The inspector's violations, Charlotte's determination, the impossible cost of compliance. He could see the path ahead now, and it led nowhere good. But he also knew, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that he couldn't surrender what 3 generations had built. Not because he was stubborn, though he was. Not because he wanted to prove something, though maybe he did. Because this shop was all that remained of his father's dreams and his grandfather's labor. Because it was the place Sarah had loved, where she'd laughed and planned their future. Because Maya deserved to inherit something more valuable than money. She deserved to inherit the knowledge that some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible. The day passed slowly. Customers came and went, oblivious to the battle being waged around them. Ethan made arrangements, sold bouquets, answered questions about soil pH and sunlight requirements, the ordinary work of an ordinary day. At 5:30, as he was preparing to close, the brick crashed through the front window. The sound was tremendous, glass shattering, customers screaming, the brick bouncing across the floor before coming to rest against the counter. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then he saw her. Charlotte Vance stood outside, beside the gaping hole where his window had been, her chest heaving and her eyes bright with fury. In her hand was another brick. "You want to play hardball, Mr. Cole?" she shouted. "Fine, let's play." She threw the second brick. It smashed through what remained of the window and struck a display of orchids, sending pots crashing to the floor. Soil scattered everywhere, water pooled on the hardwood. "Ms. Vance," Ethan started. "I offered you a fortune." Charlotte's voice cracked with rage. "I tried to be reasonable, but you're too stupid and stubborn to recognize an opportunity when it's handed to you." She stormed into the shop through the broken window. Customers backed away, their faces shocked. Ethan stood his ground, heart pounding, as Charlotte advanced on him. "This shop is pathetic," she snarled. "This whole street is pathetic, clinging to the past like it means something, like nostalgia pays the bills. You're standing in the way of real progress, real development that could transform this neighborhood into something valuable." She swept her arm across the counter, sending vases crashing to the floor. Water and flowers and broken ceramics scattered everywhere. "Miss Vance, please, don't." She grabbed a display of roses and threw it against the wall. Glass shattered. Petals fell like snow. "Don't speak to me about heritage and legacy and all that sentimental garbage. This is business. This is the real world. And in the real world, people like you get crushed by people like me." She moved through the shop like a storm, destroying everything she could reach. Arrangements carefully crafted over hours, ruined. Displays arranged with decades of expertise, demolished. 3 generations of accumulated inventory, scattered across the floor in a chaos of broken stems and shattered pots. Ethan didn't try to stop her. He simply stood and watched, his face calm, his eyes sad, as Charlotte Vance destroyed his life's work. Finally she stopped, breathing hard, standing in the center of the wreckage. Her expensive suit was streaked with dirt and water. Her hair had come loose from its careful arrangement. She looked around at what she'd done, and for a moment, just a moment, something like horror flickered across her face. "You could have avoided this," she said, her voice suddenly quiet. "All you had to do was take the money." "I know," Ethan said softly. Charlotte stared at him, and he saw her struggling to understand why he wasn't shouting, wasn't threatening, wasn't calling the police. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Then she turned and walked out through the broken window, her heels crunching on shattered glass. Ethan stood in the ruins of his shop. Water dripped from the counter. Flower petals drifted slowly to the floor. The radio still played, incongruously cheerful, some pop song about summer and freedom. He knelt and began picking up the pieces. The customers had fled during Charlotte's rampage, but one remained, a young woman with purple hair who'd been browsing the succulents. She approached cautiously. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine." "Should I call the police?" Ethan considered. What would happen if he pressed charges? Charlotte would pay a fine, maybe, face some minor consequences. But it wouldn't change anything fundamental. The developers would still want his property. The violations would still need fixing. The battle would continue, just with more lawyers involved. "No," he said, "but thank you." The woman helped him clean for a while, then left, and Ethan continued alone. He swept up glass and broken ceramic. He salvaged what flowers he could, tossing the rest into garbage bags. He mopped up water and soil, working methodically, his mind strangely calm. Around 7, Maya arrived, having walked from school. She stopped in the doorway, taking in the destruction with wide eyes. "Dad?" "I'm okay, sweetheart." "What happened?" "Charlotte Vance happened." Maya stepped inside, glass crunching under her shoes. She looked around at the ruined shop, at the broken window now covered with cardboard, at her father kneeling on the floor with a dustpan. Tears welled in her eyes. "We should call the police. She can't just—" "It's done," Ethan said. "Let it be done." "But, Dad—" He stood and pulled her into a hug. She was shaking, he realized. Or maybe he was. Hard to tell anymore. "Some battles aren't won by fighting harder," he said quietly. "Sometimes you win by refusing to become what you're fighting against." Maya pulled back to look at him. "What does that mean?" "It means Charlotte Vance is angry and desperate and lashing out. And if I match her rage with my own, I become just another version of her. But if I stay calm, stay dignified, stay true to what matters, then maybe I keep something she can never touch." "You sound like Mom." "Your mother was smarter than both of us." They cleaned together for another hour, then locked up and went upstairs. Ethan made dinner, though neither of them ate much. Later, lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling and thought about Charlotte's face in those final moments. The horror, the confusion, the utter incomprehension. She'd never encountered someone who simply wouldn't be moved. Someone for whom money and threats and even violence weren't sufficient motivation. He'd become an anomaly in her carefully ordered universe, and anomalies needed to be eliminated. But Ethan wasn't going anywhere. Tomorrow he'd call a glazier about the window. He'd assess the damage and figure out what could be salvaged. He'd open the shop, maybe not at 7, maybe not with full inventory, but he'd open it. Because that's what you did. You showed up. You did the work. You refused to surrender. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry." Helen Ethan typed back. "Not your fault." The response came quickly. "I raised her. Some of it must be my fault." He didn't know how to answer that, so he didn't try. He set the phone aside and closed his eyes, and eventually, exhausted, he slept. He dreamed of Sarah. She was standing in the shop, surrounded by white roses, smiling that smile that had first made him love her. "You doing okay?" she asked. "I'm tired," he admitted. "I know, but you're doing the right thing." "How do you know?" She laughed. "Because you've always done the right thing, Ethan. Even when it costs you, even when it hurts, that's who you are." "I don't know if I can win this." "Then don't win. Just don't lose yourself." He woke with her words still echoing in his mind. Outside, dawn was breaking over Merchant's Row, gray and cold. Somewhere, Charlotte Vance was probably strategizing her next move. Somewhere, bureaucrats were processing citations and violations. Somewhere, the machinery of progress ground forward, indifferent to the small man standing in its path. But for now, in this moment, Ethan Cole had survived another day. His shop was damaged but not destroyed. His principles were intact. His daughter still believed in him. It would have to be enough. He rose, dressed, and went downstairs to begin again. The glazier arrived at 9:30, a stocky man named Rodriguez who'd been fixing windows on Merchant's Row for 20 years. He stood in front of Cole's flowers, hands on his hips, surveying the damage with a low whistle. "That's some serious anger right there," he said. Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. In the morning light, the destruction looked even worse. Shards of glass still glittering on the sidewalk, the gaping hole covered inadequately with cardboard that flapped in the cold wind, the interior visible to anyone passing by. "Can you fix it?" Ethan asked. Sure. Take me about 3 days to get the glass cut and installed. Custom size like that, can't just pull it off the shelf. Rodriguez pulled out a measuring tape. Going to run you about 1,200, maybe 15 if we need to rebuild part of the frame. 1,500. Ethan felt the number settle in his stomach like a stone. He had 800 in the business account. He could pull from savings, but that would leave him with almost nothing for the month's other expenses. Do it, he said. Rodriguez nodded and began taking measurements. Ethan went inside and started the day's work, sweeping up the last of the glass, rearranging what inventory remained into something resembling a functional display. Half the stock was ruined, but the other half could be salvaged, wilted flowers trimmed and refreshed, undamaged pots cleaned and repositioned. The shop looked sparse, wounded, but it was still standing. Customers trickled in throughout the morning, drawn by curiosity or genuine need. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Chen's daughter-in-law, stopped by at 10 with a casserole and sympathy. My father-in-law told me what happened, she said, setting the dish on the counter. This is terrible, Mr. Cole. Have you called the police? It's being handled, Ethan said, which wasn't exactly true, but also wasn't exactly a lie. That woman should be arrested. She can't just destroy your property because you won't sell. No, she can't. Mrs. Chen studied him with sharp eyes. But you're not going to press charges. I haven't decided yet. She shook her head. You're too kind, Mr. Cole. My father-in-law is the same way. He says it's a generational thing. You older folks, you were raised to turn the other cheek. But sometimes cheeks run out. After she left, Ethan stood at the window, or what remained of it, and watched the street. Traffic was light. A few pedestrians hurried past, bundled against the cold. Across the road, the shuttered bookstore's windows reflected the gray sky like dead eyes. This neighborhood was dying, had been dying for years, and Charlotte Vance was just accelerating the inevitable. But that didn't make her right. His phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Cole? This is David Brennan, Ms. Vance's attorney. Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. I remember you. I'm calling to inform you that Meridian Properties is prepared to make one final offer. $1 million closing within 15 days. In addition, we'll cover all costs associated with yesterday's incident. In exchange for your signature on a sales agreement and a waiver of liability regarding property damage. Ethan laughed, a short, bitter sound. So she destroys my shop, then offers to pay for the repairs if I sell her the building. That's creative. Mr. Cole, I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, Mr. Brennan. I'm tired. Tired of threats, tired of pressure, tired of people treating me like an obstacle instead of a human being. Ethan's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Tell Ms. Vance the answer is still no. Tell her it will always be no. And tell her if she sets foot in my shop again, I will press charges. Mr. Cole, I strongly advise. Ethan hung up. His hands were shaking again. He pressed them flat against the counter, breathing slowly, waiting for the anger to subside. Charlotte Vance had pushed him further than he'd thought possible, had violated something fundamental, and still she wouldn't stop. Still she believed the right combination of money and pressure would break him. She didn't understand. Maybe couldn't understand. This wasn't about money. The bell chimed, or would have, if the mechanism hadn't been damaged in yesterday's chaos. Instead, the door simply opened, and Mr. Kassab from the bakery walked in, carrying a white paper bag. Morning, Ethan. Brought you some manikish. Figured you might not have had breakfast. That's kind of you. Ethan accepted the bag. You didn't have to. I know. Mr. Kassab looked around the damaged shop, his weathered face sad. This is bad business. That woman, she has no respect. She has a different way of seeing the world. Yes, the wrong way. Mr. Kassab pulled out a stool and sat heavily. My cousin, he had a restaurant in Beirut. Beautiful place. Been in the family for generations. Then the war came and someone decided they wanted his building. They made offers. He refused. They made threats. He refused. One night, they burned it to the ground. I'm sorry. The point is, these people, they don't stop. They see what they want and they take it, and they tell themselves it's progress or development or the greater good. But really, it's just greed. He leaned forward. You need help, Ethan. You can't fight this alone. What kind of help? Community? Organization? There are other shops on this street, other people who don't want to see the neighborhood destroyed. We should band together, hire a lawyer, make noise. Safety in numbers. Ethan considered this. It made sense, tactically, but it also felt like admitting he couldn't handle this himself, like acknowledging weakness. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. That window you're fixing? That's nothing compared to what they can do if they really decide to destroy you. After Mr. Kassab left, Ethan ate the manikish, flatbread with cheese and za'atar, still warm, and thought about community. He'd been so focused on protecting his shop, his legacy, that he'd forgotten other people had stakes in this fight too. Mr. Kassab's bakery, the bodega on the corner, the small law office above the pharmacy. They all faced the same threat. Maybe it was time to stop fighting alone. Around noon, Maya texted, "Coming by after school. Need to talk." That sounded ominous. Ethan spent the afternoon worrying while he worked, arranging bouquets with mechanical precision, his mind spinning through possibilities. Was she in trouble? Failing a class? Having problems with friends? She arrived at 3:30, her expression serious. Without preamble, she pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. It was a news article. Developer Charlotte Vance under fire after property destruction incident. Below was a photo, grainy but unmistakable, of Charlotte throwing a brick through his window. "Someone filmed it," Maya said. "Posted it on social media last night. It's gone viral." Ethan scrolled through the article. Apparently, one of the fleeing customers had captured the entire incident on their phone. The video showed Charlotte's rage, her destruction, Ethan's calm response. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, picked up by local news, and was now spreading across the city. The comments were brutal. This is what happens when developers think they own everything. That poor man just stood there and took it. What restraint? Charlotte Vance should be in jail. Meridian Properties needs to be investigated. "Dad," Maya said carefully, "this is big. People are calling for her arrest. The mayor's office released a statement saying they're looking into it. You have leverage now." Leverage for what? To fight back. To make them leave you alone. Ethan handed back the phone. "I don't want leverage. I just want to run my shop in peace." "Well, you're not going to get peace now. This is out in the open." She sat on the stool Mr. Kassab had vacated earlier. "You could sue her, Dad, for damages, emotional distress, whatever. With this video, you'd win easily. And then what? I spend the next year in court battles while lawyers get rich and nothing actually changes? At least you'd get something." "I don't want something from her. I want her to leave me alone." Maya sighed, that particular teenage sigh that communicated both exasperation and affection. "You're the most stubborn person I've ever met." "It's a family trait. Ask your grandfather." "Can't. He's dead." Exactly my point. Despite everything, they both smiled. It felt good, that moment of lightness in the midst of the storm. Ethan realized how much he'd needed it, needed Maya's presence and her practical wisdom that was so much like Sarah's. "Listen," he said, "I know this is hard, I know you're worried, but I need you to trust that I'm handling this the right way." "Are you?" Maya's blue eyes searched his face. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're letting her destroy you piece by piece." "Maybe, but I'd rather be destroyed than become someone who destroys others." "That's very philosophical, Dad. Also very impractical." Philosophy and impracticality are underrated virtues. Maya stood and hugged him, quick and fierce. "I love you, even when you're being impossible." "Love you too, sweetheart." After she left, Ethan looked at his phone again, scrolling through the article's comments. The outrage was real, visceral, directed at Charlotte with a force that surprised him. He'd become a symbol, apparently. The little guy standing up to corporate greed, the dignified victim refusing to be moved. He didn't feel like a symbol. He felt tired. His phone rang. Helen Vance. "Mr. Cole, have you seen the news?" "I have." "Then you know my daughter is facing serious consequences. The board is discussing her position. There's talk of criminal charges. This could destroy her career." Ethan said nothing. "I'm not asking you to feel sorry for her," Helen continued. "What she did was inexcusable. But I'm asking you to consider what happens next. If this becomes a legal battle, If you press charges, it will consume both of you. Years of your life, thousands in legal fees, all for what? Revenge? I haven't decided to press charges. But you could. With that video, you have all the power now. Helen paused. Charlotte called me this morning. She was crying. I haven't heard my daughter cry since she was 12 years old. Something twisted in Ethan's chest. He didn't want to feel sympathy for Charlotte Vance. She'd destroyed his shop, threatened his livelihood, treated him like an inconvenience to be eliminated. But the image of her crying, stripped of her armor and confidence, was hard to ignore. What do you want me to do? He asked. I don't know. I just thought you should know that underneath all that rage and ambition, there's still a person. A deeply flawed person who's made terrible choices, but a person nonetheless. After Helen hung up, Ethan stood in the quiet shop and thought about people. About the distance between who we are and who we appear to be. About the masks we wear and the pain we hide. Charlotte Vance had hurt him, but she was also someone's daughter. Someone who'd been raised by a kind woman like Helen, who'd somehow become hard and ruthless despite that kindness. What had happened to her? What wounds had she accumulated that made her think power and money were the only things that mattered? He didn't forgive her, but maybe, for the first time, he was beginning to understand her. The evening passed slowly. Rodriguez worked until dark, installing temporary weatherproofing over the broken window. Ethan closed up at 6, went upstairs, made dinner. Maya did homework while he washed dishes, and the domestic routine felt almost normal, as if the world outside hadn't gone slightly insane. At 9, his phone buzzed with an email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Apology." He opened it. Mr. Cole, I don't expect you to read this. I wouldn't in your position, but I'm writing anyway because I need to say these things, even if you delete this immediately. What I did yesterday was unforgivable. I lost control in a way I haven't since I was a child, and I destroyed something you've spent your life building. There's no excuse for that. No justification. I was angry and frustrated, and I took it out on you because you represented everything I don't understand about the world. You stand for something I thought was obsolete. The idea that some things matter more than money. That legacy and principle are worth sacrifice. I've built my career on the opposite belief. On the conviction that everything has a price and anyone can be moved with the right incentive. You proved me wrong, and instead of admitting that, I tried to destroy you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to know that I recognize what I did, and I'm sorry. I've resigned from Meridian Properties, effective immediately. The development project will continue under new leadership, and they've been instructed to leave your property alone. You've won, Mr. Cole. You get to keep your shop. For whatever it's worth, I hope it brings you peace. Charlotte Vance. Ethan read the email 3 times, trying to reconcile the words with the woman he'd met. Was this genuine? A legal strategy? A manipulation designed to make him drop potential charges? He didn't know. But something in the message felt real, felt like the sound of armor finally cracking. He didn't reply. What would he say? That he accepted her apology? That he forgave her? He wasn't sure he did, but he also wasn't sure he wanted to carry the weight of hatred for the rest of his life. Sleep came hard that night. He kept thinking about Charlotte's email, Helen's phone call, the viral video, the way the entire situation had spiraled beyond his control. He'd wanted to protect his shop, to preserve something meaningful. Instead, he'd become the center of a media storm, a symbol in a culture war he'd never asked to join. The next morning, he woke to find reporters outside his shop. There were 5 of them, cameras and microphones ready, waiting for him to open the door. When he did, they surged forward like a wave, shouting questions over each other. Mr. Cole, how do you feel about Charlotte Vance's resignation? Will you be pressing charges? What would you say to other small business owners facing similar pressure? Can you comment on Meridian Properties' statement? Ethan stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. He'd never been comfortable with attention, had spent his life trying to be invisible, and now suddenly everyone wanted a piece of him. I have no comment, he said quietly. But Mr. Cole, no comment. Please leave my property. He closed the door and locked it, his heart pounding. Through the window, still covered in weatherproofing, he could see the reporters conferring, deciding their next move. Eventually they began to disperse, though a few lingered, clearly hoping he'd change his mind. His phone rang constantly. News organizations, lawyers offering their services, people wanting interviews. He ignored them all. Around 10, there was a knock at the back door. Ethan considered not answering, but something made him check the peephole. Helen Vance stood in the alley, alone. He opened the door. "I'm sorry about the reporters," she said. "Charlotte's resignation made everything worse." "Come in." Helen stepped inside, looking around the damaged shop with sad eyes. She really did a number on this place. "It'll recover. Will you?" Ethan didn't answer. He busied himself making coffee, giving them both something to do with their hands. When it was ready, they sat at the small table in the back room, surrounded by boxes of supplies and the quiet hum of the refrigeration unit. "Charlotte meant what she wrote," Helen said. "The apology. She's never been good at admitting when she's wrong, so the fact that she did means something." "I believe you. But you won't forgive her." "I didn't say that." Ethan wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. "I don't know what I feel. Angry, definitely. Hurt, but also, I don't know, sad, maybe. Sad that someone so talented and capable has become so empty." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "That's my fault. I raised her after her father left, and I was so determined she wouldn't be weak like I was. I taught her to be strong, to be independent, to never let anyone push her around. And somewhere along the way she learned that strength meant hardness, that independence meant isolation. That's not your fault, isn't it? I made her into this." Helen wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. "Do you have children, Mr. Cole?" "A daughter, Maya. She's 15. Then you know how desperately you want to protect them, to give them tools to survive in a cruel world. And sometimes those tools become weapons, and they hurt people." Ethan thought about Maya, about the lessons he'd tried to teach her. Kindness, integrity, the value of work. Were those the right lessons? Or was he setting her up to be crushed by people harder and more ruthless? "I think," he said slowly, "that we do the best we can. We make mistakes. Our kids make mistakes. And hopefully, eventually, everyone learns something." "What has Charlotte learned?" "I don't know. But she resigned. She apologized. Those aren't nothing." Helen smiled through her tears. "You're a kind man, Mr. Cole." "I'm really not. I'm just tired of being angry." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and listening to the reporters outside begin to give up and leave. Eventually, Helen stood to go. "Thank you," she said at the door. "For what?" "For not destroying my daughter. You could have pressed charges, sued her into oblivion, ruined her completely. You chose not to. That's a gift." After she left, Ethan returned to work. The shop was quiet, the reporters gone, the street returning to its usual emptiness. He arranged flowers with automatic precision, his mind elsewhere, turning over the morning's conversation. What did it mean to forgive someone? Was it absolution, a wiping clean of the slate? Or was it something smaller, quieter, just the decision to stop carrying the weight of hurt? He didn't know. But he was starting to think that maybe forgiveness wasn't about the other person at all. Maybe it was about himself, about choosing what kind of man he wanted to be. The bell chimed. Rodriguez had fixed the mechanism that morning. Mr. Chen shuffled in, right on schedule. "Friday carnations," he said. "Friday carnations," Ethan agreed. As he wrapped the flowers, Mr. Chen said, "Saw the news. You're famous now." "I'd rather not be." "Too late. You're a symbol." "That's what my daughter said." "She's a smart girl." Mr. Chen accepted the carnations and pulled out his wallet. "My wife, before she died, she told me something. She said the world is full of people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Said I should stay away from those people because they'll make you miserable." He handed over the money. "But she also said when you meet someone who knows value, you hold on to them because they're rare." "Your wife sounds like she was wise." "She was. That's why I married her." Mr. Chen picked up his flowers. "Don't let them make you bitter, Ethan. You're one of the rare ones. The world needs people like you." After he left, Ethan stood behind the counter and felt something shift inside him. Mr. Chen was right. He could choose bitterness, could choose to let Charlotte's attack poison him, could spend the rest of his life angry at developers and progress and the way the world was changing, or he could choose to remain who he'd always been. Steady, principled, kind. It wasn't weakness. It was the hardest thing in the world. The afternoon brought more customers, more reporters making final attempts, more phone calls he didn't answer. Maya stopped by after school, relieved to find him calm and functioning. "You doing okay?" she asked. "I think so. The video has like 2 million views now. I don't want to know. People are calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who wouldn't sell his shop." Maya studied him with those two wise eyes. "You know what Mom would say right now?" "What?" "She'd say you're being too modest. She'd say standing up for what you believe in, even when it costs you, is exactly what heroism looks like." "Your mother had an inflated opinion of me." "No, she just saw you clearly." Maya hugged him. "I'm proud of you, Dad." Those words hit harder than anything Charlotte had thrown. Ethan held his daughter and felt tears sting his eyes, grateful beyond measure that in the midst of all this chaos, he still had her, still had something real and precious and worth protecting. Evening came. Ethan closed the shop, went upstairs, made dinner. The routine continued, stable and grounding. He'd survived another day. The shop was still standing. His principles were intact. It would have to be enough. Later, lying in bed, he thought about Charlotte's email again. About her resignation and her apology, and the fact that she'd actually stopped the development rather than continue fighting. Maybe he'd been wrong about her. Maybe underneath all that hardness, there was still something human, something capable of growth. Or maybe he was just being naive. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for not destroying me. I didn't deserve your mercy." CV Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Then, after careful consideration, he typed back, "We all deserve mercy, even when we don't deserve it." The reply came instantly. "I don't know how to be the person you think I am. Then maybe start by being the person you want to be." There was a long pause, then, "I don't know who that is." Ethan thought about his response, about what he could say to someone so fundamentally lost. Finally, he wrote, "Figure it out. You have time." No response came. Ethan set the phone aside and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd face whatever came next. More reporters, probably. More attention he didn't want. The ongoing challenge of running a shop in a neighborhood that was changing whether he liked it or not. But tonight, he could rest. Tonight, he could close his eyes knowing he'd stayed true to himself, had chosen principle over profit, dignity over revenge. Sarah would have been proud. That thought carried him into sleep, and for the first time in days, his dreams were peaceful. The morning broke cold and clear, frost coating the windows of Cole's flowers in delicate patterns that caught the early light. Ethan woke before his alarm, as he always did, and lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the building settling, the distant hum of traffic, Maya's soft breathing from the room next door. For a moment, he could pretend everything was normal. Then he remembered the reporters, the viral video, Charlotte's resignation, and the weight of it all settled back onto his chest. He rose, dressed, and went downstairs to open the shop. The street was empty, mercifully free of cameras and journalists. Rodriguez had finished installing the new window yesterday evening, a clean, perfect pane of glass that somehow made the rest of the shop look even more shabby by comparison. Ethan ran his fingers along the frame, feeling the smoothness of new wood against old, thinking about the $1,500 he'd just added to his debt. The first customer arrived at 7:30, a young woman Ethan had never seen before. She bought a small bouquet of daisies, then paused at the counter. "Are you the guy from the video?" she asked. "I'm Ethan Cole." "Yes." "I just wanted to say thank you for standing up to them, for not selling out." She smiled, suddenly shy. "My family lost our restaurant last year to developers. Watching you refuse to give in, it meant something." After she left, Ethan stood holding her $20 bill and felt the strange weight of being a symbol. He didn't want to represent anything. He just wanted to sell flowers and raise his daughter and live a quiet life. But the choice had been taken from him the moment that video went viral. The phone rang. He almost didn't answer, expecting another reporter, but the caller ID showed Helen Vance. "Mr. Cole, I hope I'm not calling too early. I've been up for hours." "Good. I need to speak with you about something important. Helen's voice sounded strained. Charlotte is in the hospital. Ethan's stomach dropped. What happened? She collapsed yesterday evening. The doctors are calling it exhaustion and dehydration, but I think it's more than that. The stress, the shame, everything that's happened, it's broken something in her. Helen paused. She's asking to see you. Me? You're the only person she wants to talk to. I know it's a lot to ask, given what she did, but would you consider visiting her, just for a few minutes? Ethan looked around his shop, at the sparse inventory in the new window, and the evidence of Charlotte's rage still visible in the empty spaces on his shelves. Every logical part of him said to refuse. She'd destroyed his property, threatened his livelihood, tried to drive him out of business. He owed her nothing. But he remembered her crying, Helen's voice on the phone, the email apologizing for the unforgivable. And beneath all that, he remembered Sarah's voice from his dream. Just don't lose yourself. Which hospital? He asked. St. Catherine's was on the other side of the city, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that served the wealthy and well-insured. Ethan took 2 buses to get there, arriving just before noon. The lobby was all marble and expensive art, so different from the cramped emergency room where Sarah had died that it felt like a different planet. Helen met him at the elevators, looking older than she had 2 days ago. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually impeccable appearance was rumpled as if she'd slept in her clothes. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either." They rode the elevator to the 8th floor in silence. Helen led him down a quiet corridor to a private room at the end. She paused with her hand on the door handle. "She looks fragile, Helen warned. "It's not what you're expecting." Charlotte was sitting up in bed wearing a hospital gown that made her look small and young. Her dark hair hung limp around her shoulders, and her face was pale without makeup. She looked up when they entered, and Ethan saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Genuine fear. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You came. Your mother said you wanted to see me." "I did. I do." Charlotte's hands twisted the blanket nervously. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you from the beginning." Helen touched Ethan's arm. "I'll wait outside." After she left, Ethan pulled a chair close to the bed and sat. The room was quiet except for the beep of monitors and the distant sound of hospital machinery. Charlotte stared at her hands, clearly struggling with something. "I'm listening," Ethan said gently. 2 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with acute leukemia." Charlotte's voice was tight, controlled. The doctors gave her 6 months without treatment, maybe a year with chemotherapy. She needed a bone marrow transplant, but finding a match was nearly impossible. Her blood type is rare, the marker's even rarer. We searched the registry for months. Nothing. Ethan waited, already beginning to understand where this was going. Then, miraculously, a match appeared. Anonymous donor, willing to undergo the procedure immediately. My mother had the transplant, and she went into remission. She's been cancer-free for 18 months. Charlotte finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. Last night, while I was lying here feeling sorry for myself, she told me something she'd kept secret. She told me the donor's name. The room seemed to tilt. Ethan gripped the arms of his chair, his mind racing through the timeline. 2 years ago. The request from the bone marrow registry, asking if he'd be willing to donate. He'd said yes without hesitation, had undergone the procedure, had spent a week recovering while Maya stayed with Sarah's sister. He'd never asked for details about the recipient. The process was anonymous by design. "It was you," Charlotte whispered. "You saved my mother's life. And I didn't know. I didn't know when I walked into your shop that first day, when I threatened you, when I destroyed everything you'd built. I was fighting the man who gave my mother a second chance, and I didn't know." Ethan sat in stunned silence. The pieces of the last 2 weeks rearranged themselves in his mind, taking on new and terrible meaning. Charlotte's aggression, her determination to acquire his property, the way she'd escalated when he refused, all of it had been directed at the man who'd saved her mother's life. "I don't understand," Charlotte continued, her voice breaking. "How did you stay so calm? Even when I was destroying your shop, you didn't fight back. You just stood there and took it. If you'd known who I was, who my mother was, you could have stopped me with a single word. But you didn't. Why? Because I didn't know, Ethan said simply. The donation was anonymous. I never asked for details about who received it. But even if you had known, would it have made a difference? Would you have used it against me? Ethan thought about this carefully. No, he said finally. I donated my marrow because someone needed it, not because I wanted leverage or recognition. Using it as a weapon would have violated the whole point. Charlotte covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I don't know how to live with this. I don't know how to reconcile what I did with what you did. You gave part of yourself to save a stranger, and I tried to destroy you for standing in my way. Ethan reached out and took her hand. It was an impulse, born from years of comforting Maya through her own crises, and Charlotte flinched at the contact before gripping his fingers desperately. Listen to me, he said firmly. You made mistakes, serious mistakes. But you're not beyond redemption. You recognized what you did was wrong. You apologized. You resigned. Those are meaningful actions. They don't undo the damage. No, they don't. But they're a start. Ethan squeezed her hand. My wife used to say that we're not defined by our worst moments. We're defined by what we do after them. You can choose to let this destroy you, or you can choose to learn from it and become someone better. I don't know how to be someone better. Then figure it out. Start small. Start by being honest, by treating people with dignity, by recognizing that value isn't measured in profit margins. Charlotte wiped her eyes with her free hand, leaving mascara smudges on her pale cheeks. My mother thinks you're a saint. I'm not. I'm just a man who runs a flower shop and tries to do the right thing. Most days I fail. You saved her life. I donated bone marrow. The doctors saved her life. Don't diminish what you did. Please. Charlotte's grip on his hand tightened. You gave her years she wouldn't have had. You gave me my mother back, and I repaid you with destruction and cruelty. They sat in silence for a while, Ethan holding Charlotte's hand while she cried quietly. Outside the window, the city stretched out under a gray sky, indifferent to their small drama. Ethan thought about connection, about the invisible threads that bound people together without their knowledge. He'd saved Helen's life without knowing Charlotte existed. Charlotte had tried to destroy him without knowing she owed him everything. The universe had a strange sense of irony. What happens now? Charlotte asked eventually. You get better. You figure out who you want to be. You make different choices. And you? What do you want from me? Ethan considered. He could ask for money, demand compensation for the damage, extract promises about leaving his shop alone. But those things felt hollow, transactional, meaningless in the context of what had been revealed. I want you to visit your mother more often, he said. I want you to remember how fragile life is, how quickly it can be taken away. I want you to treat people like they matter, because they do. That's all? That's everything. A knock at the door interrupted them. Helen poked her head in, her expression cautious. Is everything all right? Charlotte released Ethan's hand and wiped her face. Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner about the donor? Because it was anonymous, sweetheart. I only learned his identity myself a few weeks ago when I was reviewing medical records for my annual checkup. The hospital had made a notation in my file. Helen came into the room, moving to stand beside the bed. When you told me about the flower shop owner who wouldn't sell, I didn't make the connection at first. Then I looked him up, saw his photo, and realized. You knew, Charlotte said. You knew when you came to the shop that first time. I did. I wanted to meet the man who saved my life, to thank him personally, but I also wanted to warn him about what he was up against. Helen looked at Ethan with infinite sadness. I never imagined things would escalate the way they did. I never thought you'd lose control so completely. Charlotte flinched. I'm sorry, Mom. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to Mr. Cole. Again. As many times as it takes. I already did. Then do it again. Charlotte turned to Ethan, her eyes red and swollen. I'm sorry. For everything. For the threats, the destruction, the way I treated you like an obstacle instead of a person. I'm sorry for being exactly the kind of person my mother raised me not to be. I accept your apology, Ethan said. And he meant it. Looking at her now, broken and ashamed and genuinely remorseful, he couldn't hold on to anger. It felt pointless, like trying to grasp smoke. Helen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression darkening. "Charlotte, the board at Meridian is requesting a meeting. They want to discuss the project timeline and your resignation." "Tell them I don't care about the project anymore. You should care. You put 3 years of your life into that development. Just because you resign doesn't mean you should let them destroy your vision completely." Charlotte shook her head weakly. "It doesn't matter. Nothing matters except making this right." Ethan stood. "I should go. Let you rest." "Wait." Charlotte struggled to sit up straighter. "The development project. When I resigned, I told them to redesign around your property, but I don't know if they'll actually do it. The new leadership might decide to push forward with the original plan, use legal pressure to force you out. Then I'll deal with it." "You shouldn't have to. This is my mess." Charlotte looked at her mother. "Mom, you still have connections at Meridian. Can you make sure they honor my instructions?" "I can try." "But sweetheart, you need to understand the financial implications. Redesigning the entire project to preserve one small property will cost millions. The investors aren't going to accept that easily." "I don't care what they accept. Make them understand this is non-negotiable." Helen nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can." Ethan moved toward the door, feeling suddenly exhausted. The emotional weight of the last hour had drained him more thoroughly than any physical labor. He needed to get back to his shop, back to the familiar routine of flowers and quiet work. "Mr. Cole," Charlotte called. "Will you come back to visit? I'd like to hear more about the shop, about your family, about the things I tried to destroy." "Maybe," Ethan said, "when you're feeling stronger." He left the hospital in a daze, taking the elevator down to the marble lobby and walking out into the cold afternoon air. The revelation about the bone marrow donation had reframed everything, transforming Charlotte from a simple antagonist into something far more complicated. She was still responsible for her actions, still guilty of cruelty and destruction, but she was also human, flawed, and capable of growth. The bus ride home took an hour, giving Ethan time to process. He watched the city pass by through dirty windows, the wealthy neighborhoods with their pristine brownstones, the gradual decline into working-class areas, finally the shabby blocks of Merchants Row. Each neighborhood told a story about money and power and who got to decide what mattered. Maya was waiting when he got back to the shop, sitting on the front step with her backpack beside her. "Where were you?" she asked. "You never close in the middle of the day." "I had to visit someone in the hospital." "Who?" Ethan unlocked the door and they went inside together. He told her everything, about Helen's call, Charlotte's collapse, the revelation about the bone marrow donation. Maya listened in stunned silence, her eyes growing wider with each detail. "So you saved her mother's life," she said when he finished, "and she didn't know." "Nobody knew. That's how the system works." "That's insane. That's like something out of a movie." Maya shook her head in disbelief. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know. Confused, sad, relieved maybe that she finally understands." "Do you forgive her?" Ethan thought about Charlotte's tears, her genuine remorse, the way she'd gripped his hand like a lifeline. "I think I'm starting to. Not because what she did is okay, but because holding on to anger is exhausting." Maya hugged him, pressing her face into his shoulder. "You're a better person than I am, Dad. If someone destroyed our shop, I'd want them to suffer." "You say that now, but when you're actually faced with someone's pain, someone's genuine regret, it's harder to wish suffering on them." They spent the evening together, eating takeout Chinese food and watching terrible reality television. It was exactly what Ethan needed: mundane, comforting, normal. Around 9, Maya went to bed, and Ethan sat alone in the living room, thinking about the strange turns life took. 2 years ago, he'd donated bone marrow to a stranger because it was the right thing to do. He'd never expected recognition or gratitude. He certainly hadn't expected that stranger's daughter to later try to destroy his life. The symmetry of it was almost poetic, in a dark sort of way. His phone buzzed. A text from Helen. "Charlotte is resting. The doctors say she can go home tomorrow. Thank you for coming today. It meant more than you know." Ethan typed back. "How is she really?" The response came quickly, fragile, ashamed. For the first time in years, she's questioning everything she believed about herself. It's painful to watch, but maybe necessary. Growth is usually painful. True. Mr. Cole, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Why did you donate? Most people don't even register for the bone marrow program, let alone follow through when matched. Ethan stared at the question, thinking back to that day 3 years ago when he'd received the call from the registry. Sarah had been sick by then, already in the late stages of the cancer that would kill her 6 months later. He remembered standing in the hospital corridor, listening to a stranger explain that someone needed his help, and thinking that if there was even a chance he could save a life, when he couldn't save his wife's, he had to try. Someone I loved was dying, he typed. I couldn't save her, but I could save someone else's person. It felt important. There was a long pause before Helen replied. I'm so sorry for your loss. And thank you for saving me when you couldn't save her. That's a gift I can never repay. You don't need to repay it. Just love your daughter. That's enough. Ethan set the phone aside and went to the window, looking out at Merchants Row. The street was quiet, most shops already closed for the night. Mr. Kassab's bakery showed a light in the back room where he was probably preparing tomorrow's bread. The bodega on the corner had its security gate half drawn. The old bookstore remained dark and empty, a monument to businesses that hadn't survived. His shop was still here, though, damaged, struggling, but standing. And for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt something like hope. The next day brought an unexpected development. Ethan arrived at the shop to find a letter slipped under the door. Formal, legal, bearing the Meridian Properties letterhead. His heart sank as he opened it, expecting threats or eviction notices. Instead, he found an apology. Dear Mr. Cole, on behalf of Meridian Properties and its board of directors, we would like to formally apologize for the aggressive tactics employed during preliminary development discussions. The actions of our former senior vice president do not reflect our company's values or standard business practices. We are writing to inform you that the Merchants Row development project has been substantially redesigned to preserve your property and several other historic buildings in the area. While this redesign represents a significant financial investment, we believe it will ultimately create a more authentic and community-focused development. We hope this demonstrates our commitment to responsible urban development and our respect for the neighborhood's existing character. Should you have any questions or concerns, please contact our community liaison at the number below. Sincerely, Marcus Chen, CEO, Meridian Properties. Ethan read the letter 3 times, hardly believing it. They were actually doing it. Redesigning the entire project to accommodate his shop. It seemed impossible, too good to be true. His phone rang. Helen.
Did you receive the letter? She asked. Just now? Is this real? It's real. I spent most of yesterday and all of last night calling in every favor I had. The board wasn't happy about the redesign costs, but I convinced them that the positive publicity from preserving the neighborhood would outweigh the financial hit. How did you manage that? By threatening to go public with the whole story if they didn't. The video of Charlotte destroying your shop already made them look terrible. Adding the detail that you saved my life, and they still tried to force you out, would have been a PR nightmare. Helen paused. I'm not proud of using manipulation, but sometimes the ends justify the means. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept this olive branch. Say you'll let the development move forward with your shop intact. Because frankly, Mr. Cole, this neighborhood needs the investment. Half the buildings on Merchants Row are falling apart. The redesigned plan will preserve the historic core while bringing in new businesses, better infrastructure, improved safety. It could save the street instead of destroying it. Ethan thought about the shuttered bookstore, the crumbling facades, the sense of decay that permeated every block. Helen was right. The neighborhood was dying. Intelligent development might actually help. Okay, he said, I'll support the project, on one condition. What's that? They preserve Mr. Kassab's bakery too, and the bodega. And they make sure the new businesses include affordable options for the people who actually live here, not just luxury shops for wealthy transplants. Helen laughed. You drive a hard bargain for someone who claims not to care about business. I care about community. There's a difference. I'll make sure your conditions are included in the revised plan. Thank you, Mr. Cole, for being reasonable when you had every right to be difficult. After she hung up, Ethan stood in his shop holding the letter and feeling something shift inside him. The battle was over.
He'd won. Not by fighting, not by matching Charlotte's aggression, but by simply refusing to be moved, by standing firm in his principles and trusting that integrity mattered. Sarah would have been proud. The rest of the day passed in a blur of customers and phone calls. Word had spread about the development redesign, and local news was calling it a victory for small businesses and community preservation. Ethan gave exactly one interview to a small neighborhood newspaper and kept his comments brief and focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on conflict. Maya came by after school, bringing Mr. Chen with her. "He wanted to hear the news from you directly," she explained. Mr. Chen listened as Ethan described the letter and the redesigned development plan. When he finished, the old man nodded slowly. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. "He always believed that dignity and principle would outlast money and power. You proved him right." "I didn't do anything special. I just refused to sell." "Exactly. In a world where everything is for sale, refusing to sell is revolutionary." Mr. Chen smiled. "My wife knew your grandfather. Did I ever tell you that? She used to say he had roots that went deep into the earth, that storms couldn't move him because he was anchored to something real. She said the same thing about you." After they left, Ethan closed the shop and went upstairs. He made dinner, helped Maya with her homework, and settled into the evening routine. But his mind kept drifting back to Charlotte in the hospital, to her tears and her shame and her desperate question, "How do I become someone better?" He picked up his phone and sent her a text. "Start by being kind, especially when it costs you something." The reply came an hour later. "I'm trying. It's harder than I expected. Most worthwhile things are. Will you really visit me when I'm better?" Ethan thought about this. Part of him wanted to keep his distance, to let Charlotte deal with her redemption alone. But another part, the part that had raised a daughter and lost a wife and learned that compassion was stronger than anger, wanted to help. "Yes," he typed. "When you're ready." That night, he dreamed of Sarah again. They were in the shop together, arranging flowers for a wedding. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hands moving with practiced grace among the blooms. "You did good," she said. "I just stood my ground." That's all any of us can do, stand our ground and hope it matters. She looked up, her eyes bright. "I'm proud of you, Ethan, for not losing yourself in the fight." "I almost did, several times." "But you didn't. That's what counts." She reached across the counter and took his hand. "Charlotte Vance is going to be okay, you know, because you showed her a different way to be human." "I didn't show her anything. I just refused to surrender." Sometimes that's the most powerful lesson of all. He woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of Maya singing in the shower. Another day, another chance to do the work and honor the legacy and be the person Sarah had believed he could be. Downstairs, he opened the shop at 7 as always. The new window gleamed in the morning light, and the inventory, slowly being rebuilt, looked almost respectable. Rodriguez had done good work. The shop was scarred but healing, just like everything else. The bell chimed. Helen walked in, carrying a large wrapped package. "From Charlotte," she said, setting it on the counter. "She wanted you to have this." Ethan unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph, black and white, professional quality, showing 3 generations of Cole men standing in front of the flower shop. His grandfather, stern and proud, his father, smiling gently, and himself as a young boy, maybe 7 years old, holding a bouquet of roses almost as big as he was. "Where did she get this?" he asked, his voice thick. "She hired a researcher to dig through historical archives. Found it in an old newspaper article about family businesses." Helen touched the frame gently. "She wanted you to know that she sees the value in what you've preserved, that she understands now what she almost destroyed." Ethan stared at the photograph, at his grandfather's hands resting on his shoulders, at the shop behind them, looking new and hopeful. 3 generations, all trying to do the same thing, show up, do the work, be part of the community's fabric. "Tell her thank you," he managed. "Tell her yourself. She's being released from the hospital this afternoon." After Helen left, Ethan hung the photograph on the wall behind the counter, right next to the picture of himself and Sarah on their wedding day. Past and present, memory and hope, all tangled together in the small space of his shop. The day continued, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Customers came and went, Flowers were sold. Life moved forward as it always did, regardless of drama or conflict or the small victories that seemed so important in the moment. And through it all, Ethan worked with steady hands and a quiet heart, knowing that sometimes the greatest triumph was simply surviving with your soul intact. The photograph became a focal point in the shop, drawing comments from regular customers who remembered Ethan's father and grandfather. Mrs. Rodriguez stood before it for a long time one morning, her eyes misty. "Your grandfather sold me flowers for my wedding," she said. 52 years ago. White roses and baby's breath. He told me marriage was like gardening. You had to tend it every day, pull the weeds before they took root, and never take the blooms for granted. She smiled at the memory. He was right about that. Ethan poured her a cup of coffee from the pot he now kept in the back room. They sat together at the small table, and she told him stories about the neighborhood as it used to be, when every storefront was occupied, when families knew each other by name, when Merchants Row was the heart of the community instead of its forgotten edge. "Things change," she said finally. "Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But what you did, standing up to that developer, reminding people that some things matter more than money, that was important. You gave the neighborhood back its dignity." After she left, Ethan thought about dignity and what it cost to maintain it. The shop was still struggling financially. The city inspection violation still needed addressing, though Helen had quietly arranged for the timeline to be extended. Maya's tuition was still overdue. The daily reality of barely getting by hadn't changed just because he'd won a moral victory. But something else had changed. The neighborhood was watching now, paying attention, remembering that resistance was possible. 3 days after Charlotte's release from the hospital, she called him. "I'm ready," she said without preamble. "If your offer to visit still stands." "It stands." "Where are you?" "Home. My mother's house in Riverside." "Do you know it?" Ethan didn't, but he looked up the address and took 2 buses and a train to get there. The house was in one of those old money neighborhoods where the trees formed canopies over quiet streets and the homes sat back from the road behind iron gates. Helen's place was a brick colonial with white columns and gardens that even in late winter showed signs of meticulous care. Charlotte met him at the door. She looked better than she had in the hospital, color back in her cheeks, hair clean and styled, but there was something different about her demeanor. The aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by something softer and more uncertain. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it's asking a lot." "It's fine. How are you feeling?" "Physically? Better. Everything else is complicated." She led him through a marble foyer into a sunlit living room where Helen was arranging flowers in a crystal vase. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. "Mr. Cole?" Helen greeted him warmly. "Can I get you some tea? Coffee?" "Coffee would be great." While Helen disappeared into the kitchen, Charlotte gestured for Ethan to sit on a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She took the chair across from him, perching on the edge like she might need to flee at any moment. "The photograph you sent," Ethan began, "that was incredibly thoughtful. I wanted you to know I see it now, what I almost destroyed. It's not just a building or a business. It's your family's story, your history, the physical manifestation of 3 generations of work and love and commitment." Charlotte's hands twisted in her lap. "I spent my whole career reducing things to their economic value, and I never stopped to consider what I was really destroying." Helen returned with coffee and small pastries arranged on delicate china. She sat beside Charlotte, close enough to touch, but respecting her daughter's space. "Charlotte has been doing a lot of thinking," Helen said, "about her career, her choices, what she wants her life to mean." "I've been talking to a therapist," Charlotte admitted. "First time in my life. She asked me when I started believing that worth was measured in dollars, and I couldn't answer. I don't remember ever believing anything else." Ethan sipped his coffee, considering his words carefully. "What changed? Between wanting to destroy my shop and wanting to understand it? Finding out you saved my mother, it forced me to see you as a person instead of an obstacle. And once I saw you as a person, I had to look at what I'd done, and I couldn't justify it anymore." Charlotte's voice cracked slightly. "The worst part is I wasn't even doing it for the money. I had enough money. I was doing it for the challenge, for the achievement, to prove I could transform an entire neighborhood according to my vision. I didn't care about the people who already lived there or what they'd lose. I just cared about winning. And now? Now I don't know what I care about."
I resigned from the only career I've ever known. I have no idea what to do with myself. For the first time since college, I don't have a 5-year plan or quarterly targets or stakeholders to impress. She looked at him with desperate eyes. How do you live without those structures? How do you know what matters when you're not chasing the next promotion or acquisition? Ethan set down his coffee cup. You start small. You pay attention to the people around you. You ask yourself at the end of each day whether you made the world slightly better or slightly worse, and you try to tip the balance toward better. That sounds impossibly simple. It is simple. That doesn't make it easy.
Helen reached over and took Charlotte's hand. You don't have to figure everything out today, sweetheart. You just have to take the next right step. What is the next right step? That's for you to decide, Ethan said. But maybe start by fixing what you broke. Not just my shop, that's being handled. I mean the other damage. The fear you created in other business owners. The relationships you burned in your industry. The trust you violated. Charlotte nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that. I want to set up a fund for small businesses on Merchants Row who need help with repairs, improvements, code compliance, things they can't afford on their own. I want to use my money for something that actually helps instead of just accumulates. That's a good start. But it feels too easy, like I'm trying to buy forgiveness. You're not buying forgiveness, Helen interjected. You're making amends. There's a difference. They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from practical matters to philosophical questions about purpose and meaning. Charlotte was surprisingly vulnerable, admitting to fears and doubts she'd apparently never voiced before. Ethan found himself liking this version of her, uncertain and searching, but genuine in a way the confident executive had never been. Before he left, Charlotte walked him to the door. Can I visit your shop sometime? She asked. Not to cause trouble or check on the development, just to see it properly, to understand what my grandfather built? Ethan smiled. It's my grandfather who built it, but yes, you're welcome anytime. And Maya, your daughter. I'd like to meet her if that's appropriate, to apologize directly for the fear I must have caused. I'll ask her. She gets to make that decision. Charlotte nodded, accepting this boundary. Thank you, Mr. Cole, for not giving up on me even when I gave you every reason to. Everyone deserves a chance to become who they want to be, Ethan said, even people who've made terrible mistakes. The train ride home gave him time to process the visit. Charlotte was genuinely trying to change, to become someone better, but the path from destructive executive to compassionate human being was long and uncertain. He hoped she'd make it, but he also knew that transformation required more than good intentions. It required daily choices, consistent effort, and the willingness to fail and try again. When he got back to Merchants Row, he found a small crowd gathered outside his shop. His heart sank, expecting protesters or more reporters, but as he got closer, he realized these were neighbors, Mr. Kassab, Mrs. Chen, the owner of the bodega, the lawyer from the office above the pharmacy, a dozen others he recognized from the street. What's going on? He asked. Mr. Kassab stepped forward, holding a manila envelope. We had a meeting about the development. We wanted to make sure you knew we support what you did, and we want to work together to ensure the redesign plan actually serves the community. We formed a merchants association, Mrs. Chen added, to give us collective bargaining power. We want you to be president. Ethan was stunned. I don't know anything about running an association. You know about standing your ground and not compromising your principles, the bodega owner said. That's exactly what we need. They filed into his shop, crowding around the counter, while Mr. Kassab opened the envelope and pulled out a roughly drafted charter for the Merchants Row Business Alliance. The goals were simple: preserve the neighborhood's character, ensure affordable rents for existing businesses, hold developers accountable to community needs, and support each other through the changes ahead. We know the development is coming, Mr. Kassab explained. We're not trying to stop progress, but we want to make sure we're not erased in the process, that our voices matter, that this remains a neighborhood for real people, not just luxury condos and expensive boutiques. Ethan read through the charter, his chest tight with emotion. These people, his neighbors, his community, had found their courage by watching his small stand against Charlotte Vance. They'd remembered that collective action was possible, that they didn't have to accept whatever was imposed on them. I'll do it, he said. On one condition. We make decisions collectively. I'm not a dictator, I'm just the person who facilitates discussion. Everyone agreed, and they spent the next hour hammering out practical details, meeting schedules, communication methods, who would liaison with Meridian Properties on the redesign. It was messy and democratic and exactly what the neighborhood needed. After everyone left, Ethan sat in the quiet shop and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not naive optimism, but genuine hope grounded in community and collective will. They might not win every battle. The neighborhood would still change, would still face challenges, but they'd face them together. Maya came home from school to find him smiling. "What happened?" she asked suspiciously. "You look happy. That's weird." He told her about the Merchants Association, about his visit with Charlotte, about the small fund being set up to help businesses with repairs. She listened with growing excitement. "So you're like the neighborhood leader now?" "I'm the president of a small business association. That's not quite the same thing." "Close enough." She hugged him. "Mom would be so proud. You're building something bigger than just our shop." "Your mom was always better at community organizing than I was. I'm just following her example." That evening, he received an email from Marcus Chen at Meridian Properties requesting a meeting with the new Merchants Association to review the redesigned development plans. Ethan forwarded it to the group, and within an hour they'd scheduled a community meeting for the following week. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Ethan worked with Mr. Kassab and the others to develop a list of priorities and concerns. They wanted guarantees about rent control for existing businesses, commitments to affordable housing units in the new development, preservation of historic facades, limitations on chain stores, and community input on which new businesses would be welcomed. Charlotte called midweek. "I heard about the Merchants Association. That's smart." "It was their idea, not mine." "But you're leading it. That's perfect. You'll actually represent the community instead of just posturing about it." She paused. "I want to help. Behind the scenes, I mean. I still have connections at Meridian, people who will listen to me. I can advocate for your priorities." Ethan hesitated. Accepting Charlotte's help felt complicated, potentially compromising, but it was also practical. She knew the development world, understood how to navigate corporate bureaucracy, and genuinely seemed to want to make amends. "Okay," he said, "but everything goes through the association. We make decisions collectively." "Of course. I'm not trying to control anything. I just want to help fix what I broke." The community meeting was held in the basement of St. Michael's Church, the only space large enough to accommodate everyone. More than 60 people showed up: business owners, residents, community activists, even a few city council members. Marcus Chen arrived with a team of architects and planners, looking nervous. Ethan stood at the front of the room, acutely aware of all the eyes watching him. Public speaking had never been his strength, but Maya was there, sitting in the front row with an encouraging smile, and he thought about Sarah and how she'd always believed he was stronger than he gave himself credit for. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We're here because Merchants Row is at a crossroads. Change is coming, whether we want it or not. The question is whether we'll be partners in that change or victims of it." He introduced Marcus Chen, who presented the redesigned development plans on a portable screen. The new design preserved a core of historic buildings, including Ethan's shop, the bakery, and several others, while adding modern mixed-use structures around them. There were commitments to affordable housing, community spaces, and local business incentives. It was better than Ethan had expected, but the devil was in the details. For 3 hours, they went through the plans point by point. Rent guarantees for existing businesses. How long would they last? Affordable housing units. What qualified as affordable? Community spaces. Who would control access and programming? Local business incentives. Which types of businesses would be prioritized? Marcus Chen answered most questions honestly, admitting when he didn't have answers and promising to get back to them. It was clear he'd been briefed to take the community seriously, to treat this as genuine partnership rather than performative consultation. Toward the end of the meeting, an elderly woman Ethan didn't recognize raised her hand. "I have a question for Mr. Cole," she said. "Why should we trust that this developer won't just change their mind once we agree to their plans? What's to stop them from reneging on all these promises once construction starts?" It was a fair question, one Ethan had asked himself. He looked at Marcus Chen,
who nodded permission for him to answer honestly. Nothing is guaranteed, Ethan said. Promises can be broken, contracts can be renegotiated, circumstances can change. But we're not negotiating from weakness anymore. We have media attention, political support, and most importantly, we have each other. If Meridian breaks their promises, we respond collectively and loudly. We make it more expensive for them to betray us than to keep their word. So you're saying we have to stay vigilant? Exactly. This isn't a one-time fight. It's an ongoing relationship that requires constant attention and willingness to push back when necessary. After the meeting, several people thanked Ethan for his leadership. Mr. Kassab clapped him on the shoulder. "You're a natural at this," he said. "I'm really not. I'm terrified." Good. Leaders who aren't afraid of their responsibility tend to be dangerous. Walking home with Maya that night, Ethan felt exhausted but satisfied. They'd achieved something meaningful. Not victory exactly, but the foundation for partnership. The development would still happen, the neighborhood would still change, but they'd have a voice in that change. "You were good up there," Maya said. "Confident, strong." "I was faking it." "Isn't that what confidence is? Faking it until it feels real?" She had a point. Maybe courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. The following week brought unexpected news. Charlotte had set up her small business fund as promised, but she'd done more than that. She'd also resigned from the boards of 3 other development companies and publicly criticized their aggressive acquisition tactics. The real estate industry was in an uproar, calling her a traitor. But community organizations were celebrating her as a convert to their cause. Helen called to give him updates. "She's burning bridges left and right. I'm worried about her." "Is she okay?" "Physically, yes. Emotionally, I think she's going through something like a religious conversion, but for urban planning. She keeps talking about walkable neighborhoods and community-centered development, and affordable housing as a human right. My conservative business friends don't know what to make of her." "What do you make of her?" "I think she's finally becoming the person I always hoped she'd be. But I also think the pendulum has swung too far the other way. She went from ruthless developer to anti-development activist overnight, and neither extreme is healthy." Ethan understood Helen's concern. Charlotte was searching for redemption through activism, trying to atone for years of harm by becoming its opposite. But real change was more nuanced than that, required balance and wisdom rather than just swapping one ideology for another. "Tell her to call me," he said, "if she wants to talk." Charlotte called that evening, sounding frantic. "I gave an interview to the Times about predatory development practices, and now 3 different companies are threatening to sue me. My former colleagues are calling me a hypocrite. People I thought were friends won't return my calls." She laughed, but it sounded slightly hysterical. "I thought doing the right thing would feel better than this." "The right thing usually feels terrible in the short term," Ethan said. "That's how you know it's right." That's a depressing philosophy, but true. Charlotte, you're doing good work, but you need to slow down. You can't fix everything you broke in a few weeks. Redemption is a long process. "I don't have time for a long process. I need to make things right now." "Why the urgency?" There was a long pause. When Charlotte spoke again, her voice was small. "Because if I slow down, I'll have to actually feel what I did. The guilt, the shame, the realization that I hurt people for no reason except ambition. If I keep moving, keep fighting, keep trying to fix things, I can avoid sitting with that." Ethan recognized the impulse. He'd done the same thing after Sarah's death, throwing himself into work to avoid the grief. It hadn't worked then, and it wouldn't work for Charlotte now. "You can't outrun guilt," he said gently. "Trust me, I've tried. Eventually you have to stop and face it, let it hurt, and then choose to move forward anyway." "I don't know how to do that." "Then maybe that's what you work on with your therapist. Not grand gestures or public activism, just learning to forgive yourself." After they hung up, Ethan sat in the dark living room and thought about forgiveness. He'd forgiven Charlotte for destroying his shop, more or less. But could Charlotte forgive herself? That was the harder question, the one that would determine whether her transformation stuck or collapsed under the weight of unprocessed shame. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm of ordinary days punctuated by community meetings and planning sessions. The Merchants Association was gaining momentum, attracting new members and media attention.
Meridian Properties was being remarkably cooperative, incorporating most of their feedback into revised plans. It felt almost too good to be true, and Ethan kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't. Instead, something unexpected happened. Charlotte showed up at the shop one Tuesday morning looking nervous. She wasn't alone. Helen was with her, and between them walked a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Mr. Cole," Charlotte said, "this is Dr. Patricia Morrison. She's my therapist. I asked her to come with me because I wanted to say something important, and I wanted a witness to make sure I said it right." Ethan invited them to the back room, made coffee, and waited. Charlotte took a deep breath. "I've been working through my actions and their impact, trying to understand not just what I did, but why. Dr. Morrison has helped me see that I was using achievement and power to avoid dealing with deeper issues, fear of inadequacy, fear of not living up to my father's memory, fear of being ordinary." "Your father?" Ethan asked, looking at Helen. "He died when Charlotte was 12, Helen explained. He was a successful developer, brilliant and ambitious. Charlotte idolized him. I spent my whole life trying to be like him," Charlotte continued, "trying to prove I was worthy of his name. And in doing that, I became exactly the kind of person who destroys communities for profit, the kind of person he actually was." She looked at her mother. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know you don't like hearing that." Helen's eyes were sad but not surprised. "Your father was complicated, brilliant but ruthless. I loved him, but I never pretended he was perfect." Charlotte turned back to Ethan. "The point is, I need to stop trying to fix everything I broke and start building something new. Something that isn't about redemption or atonement or making amends. Something that's just about doing good work because it matters." "What kind of work?" Ethan asked. "I'm starting a nonprofit, community-based urban planning. We'll work with neighborhoods facing development pressure, help them organize, advocate for their priorities, and push back against predatory practices." I know it sounds self-serving, like I'm trying to be the hero after being the villain, but Dr. Morrison thinks it's a healthy channel for my skills and energy, and Mom thinks it's better than moping around her house feeling sorry for myself. Ethan smiled. "I think it sounds perfect for you." "Really?" "Really. You understand the development world better than any activist. You know how these companies think, what pressure points actually work, where the weaknesses are in their strategies. That knowledge, combined with genuine commitment to community welfare, could be powerful." Charlotte sagged with relief. "I was afraid you'd think it was another scheme, another way to manipulate my image." "I think you're trying to figure out who you want to be, and that's the hardest work there is. Give yourself permission to experiment, to make mistakes, to build something slowly instead of demolishing and rebuilding overnight." Dr. Morrison spoke for the first time. "That's excellent advice, Mr. Cole. May I ask how you learned it?" "From losing my wife and realizing that nothing I achieved professionally mattered compared to the small daily work of being present and kind. Took me a while to internalize it, but eventually it stuck." They talked for another hour, the conversation meandering through topics like purpose and legacy and what it meant to live a meaningful life. Charlotte seemed lighter by the end, as if permission to build slowly had lifted a weight she'd been carrying. After they left, Ethan returned to his flowers and felt something settle into place. The battle with Charlotte had transformed into something unexpected, not quite friendship, but a connection based on mutual growth and hard-won understanding. They'd both been changed by their collision, had both learned something about themselves and each other. The world continued to turn. Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and new blooms. The shop flourished with seasonal inventory, and customers commented on how much brighter it seemed, though Ethan hadn't changed anything except his own attitude. The Merchants Association held successful fundraisers. Meridian Properties broke ground on the first phase of development, and true to their word, they preserved the historic core and hired local contractors. And through it all, Ethan Cole stood behind his counter, arranging flowers with the same patient care his grandfather had shown, building something that would outlast him. Not through grand gestures or dramatic stands, but through simple consistency and the quiet dignity of work done well. 6 months passed like water flowing around stones, steadily, inevitably, reshaping everything it touched. The construction on Merchants Row began in earnest that summer. transforming the street into a symphony of jackhammers and concrete mixers, dust clouds and yellow caution tape. But true to Meridian's promise, the historic buildings remained untouched islands in a sea of progress. Ethan watched from his shop window as the neighborhood transformed. New structures rose beside old ones, modern glass and steel framing the weathered brick of his grandfather's building. It should have looked jarring, this collision of eras, but somehow the architects had managed to create dialogue rather than conflict. The new buildings stepped back respectfully, their clean lines emphasizing rather than overshadowing the ornate details of the older facades. Maya came downstairs one morning in late August to find her father staring out the window, coffee growing cold in his hand. "Penny for your thoughts," she said. "Just thinking about change, how it's not always the enemy we expect it to be." Deep thoughts before 7 a.m. Very philosophical. She poured herself orange juice. "I got the acceptance letter yesterday. Full scholarship to state theater program." Ethan turned from the window, his heart simultaneously swelling and breaking.
"Maya, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "Because I knew you'd do that thing where you pretend you're not crying while obviously crying." She grinned. "Like you're doing right now." He pulled her into a hug, not bothering to hide the tears. His daughter, brilliant and talented and ready to fly. Sarah would have been so proud. He was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. "When do you leave?" 3 weeks. Freshman orientation starts September 1st. She pulled back to look at him. "Are you going to be okay? Running the shop alone, dealing with the association, all of it?" "I managed before you were born. I'll manage again." "That was before you became the neighborhood's moral compass and accidental community organizer." "I'm not anyone's moral compass." "Tell that to the 20 people who call you for advice every week." Maya squeezed his hand. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself. Eat real food, not just sandwiches from the bodega. Maybe even go on a date or something crazy like that." "Now you're pushing it." "I'm serious, Dad. Mom would want you to be happy, not just surviving." The words hit deeper than Maya probably intended. Ethan had been surviving for 3 years, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. The battle with Charlotte had shaken him out of that fog somewhat, but Maya was right. Survival wasn't the same as happiness. "I'll try," he said. "No promises, but I'll try." The bell chimed, and Mr. Chen shuffled in for his Friday carnations. He'd been coming every week without fail for so long that Ethan had the bouquet ready before the old man even reached the counter. "Saw the college acceptance on your face," Mr. Chen said to Maya. "Congratulations. Your grandfather would be proud." "You knew my grandfather?" Maya asked. Everyone knew Samuel Cole. He had a way of making you feel seen, like your business, no matter how small, mattered to him. Mr. Chen paid for his flowers. "Your father has the same gift. Different style, same heart." After he left, Maya hugged Ethan again. "See? Moral compass." The day passed in the familiar rhythm of work. Ethan processed a delivery of late summer blooms, sunflowers and dahlias, and the last of the hydrangeas. He created arrangements for a wedding, a funeral, and a birth, marking the community's milestones in petals and stems. Around noon, Charlotte stopped by. She'd been coming to the shop once a week since starting her nonprofit, ostensibly to discuss the Merchants Association, but really, Ethan suspected, because she needed the grounding presence of someone who'd seen her at her worst and still believed in her potential for better. "Big news," she said, setting her bag on the counter. "The City Council approved our proposal for participatory budgeting and development projects. Communities will have real input on how infrastructure funds get spent." "That's huge. Congratulations." "It wouldn't have happened without the Merchants Association giving us a test case. Your work here, what you built, it proved the model works." Charlotte smiled, and it was genuine, without the sharp edges of her old professional persona. "I'm learning that real change is slower and messier than I ever imagined, but also more durable." "How's the nonprofit going otherwise?" "We're working with 3 other neighborhoods now, helping them organize against aggressive development. It's exhausting and frustrating, and I've never felt more purposeful in my life." She paused. "My mother wants to meet Maya before she leaves for college. Would that be okay?" "I'll ask her. She gets to decide." "Of course." Charlotte picked up a dahlia, examining its layered petals.
Can I ask you something personal?
Do you ever regret it? Standing your ground, refusing to sell? Your life would be so much easier right now with that money. Ethan considered the question seriously. His savings account was still anemic. The shop still struggled to break even most months, and he'd just taken on more debt to finally address the code violations. By any practical measure, refusing Charlotte's offer had been financially disastrous. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it, because money would have solved some problems while creating others. I'd have lost the shop, lost this connection to my family's history, lost the purpose that gets me up every morning, and I'd have taught Maya that everything has a price, that principles are negotiable when the number gets high enough. That's not the lesson I wanted her to learn. What did you want her to learn? That some things are worth protecting even when it costs you. That dignity and integrity matter more than comfort. That the small choices we make about who we are and what we stand for actually shape the world around us." Charlotte nodded slowly. "I'm trying to learn those lessons now. Better late than never, I guess." Much better late than never. After Charlotte left, Ethan closed the shop for lunch and walked to the construction site where the new community center was taking shape. This had been one of the association's key demands, a public space for neighborhood gatherings, free and accessible to everyone. Meridian had initially resisted, calling it unprofitable square footage, but they'd eventually agreed after sustained community pressure. Marcus Chen was on site, reviewing blueprints with the foreman. He waved when he saw Ethan approaching. "Come to inspect our work?" Marcus asked. "Just curious about progress." "We're on schedule. Center should be finished by October, ready for programming by November." Marcus rolled up the blueprints. "I wanted to thank you, actually. Working with the Merchants Association has made this project better than the original design. More integrated, more community-focused. It's the kind of development I always wanted to do, but never had the political cover for." Political cover? Developers are judged on profit margins and return on investment. Doing the right thing often means sacrificing short-term gains for long-term value, and most boards won't support that. But you and your association created such public pressure that my board had no choice but to prioritize community benefit. You gave us permission to be better. Ethan had never thought of it that way, that their resistance had created space for people like Marcus to do work they believed in. It was a reminder that change happened through complex systems, not just individual heroism. "The community center," Ethan said. "Will there be performance space? My daughter's going to college for theater, and it would be good to know there's a venue for local artists when she comes home for visits." "There will be. Black box theater with flexible seating, capacity for about 100. The association insisted on it." Marcus smiled. "Your daughter's talented?" "Incredibly. Takes after her mother." "Your wife was a performer?" "A teacher. But she had this gift for making people feel capable of more than they thought possible. Maya inherited that, along with the confidence to stand on a stage and command attention." Walking back to the shop, Ethan thought about Sarah and how she'd shaped both him and Maya in ways that continued to ripple outward. She'd been dead for 3 years, but her influence persisted, in the values he'd defended, in the courage Maya showed, in the community he'd helped build. Maybe that was what legacy really meant, not buildings or businesses, but the way you changed the people around you for the better. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers. Mrs. Rodriguez wanted flowers for her granddaughter's quinceañera. A young couple came in nervously shopping for wedding bouquets. A businessman bought roses for his assistant's birthday. Each transaction was small, ordinary, but Ethan had learned to see the meaning beneath the surface. These were moments of connection, of marking life's passages, of expressing what words couldn't quite capture. Around 4, Helen Vance arrived, elegantly dressed as always, but with a warmth in her demeanor that hadn't been there during their first meeting. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. "I wanted to see the shop properly. Charlotte's described it so many times, but I needed to see it for myself." "You're always welcome." Helen walked slowly through the shop, examining the flowers, running her fingers along the old wooden counter, studying the photographs on the wall. When she reached the image of 3 generations of Cole men, she stopped. "This is what Charlotte almost destroyed," she said softly. "Not just a building or a business, but this continuity, this visible proof that families endure, that work matters, that showing up every day for decades creates something real." "It's what your marrow donation saved," Ethan said. "If you hadn't recovered,
The shop wouldn't exist anymore. I'd have sold it. Couldn't have maintained it while grieving. So in a way, you're part of its survival too. Helen turned to him, tears in her eyes. May I tell you something I've never told anyone, not even Charlotte? Of course. When I was diagnosed, when they told me I had months to live without treatment, I made peace with it. My husband was gone, my daughter was successful and self-sufficient. I'd lived a full life. I was ready to let go. She touched the photograph gently. But then the transplant worked and I had to figure out what to do with the extra years I'd been given. I spent the first year just existing, going through the motions. The second year trying to reconnect with Charlotte, to understand what she'd become. And this past year, watching her transformation because of you, I've finally understood what these bonus years are for. What's that? Witnessing redemption. Seeing that it's possible for people to change, that mistakes don't have to define us forever, that grace and second chances are real. Helen smiled through her tears. You gave me my life back, Mr. Cole, and then you gave my daughter hers. I can never repay that debt. There is no debt. You don't owe me anything. I know. That's what makes it so profound. They sat together in the back room, drinking tea and talking about children and loss and the unexpected ways life circles back on itself. Helen told him about her husband, a brilliant developer who'd prioritized achievement over relationships and died young from the stress. She talked about raising Charlotte alone, about the impossible balance of teaching strength without hardness, independence without isolation. I failed her in some ways, Helen admitted. I was so determined she wouldn't be weak like I thought I was. I made her into someone incapable of vulnerability. But you've taught her that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites, that real courage is admitting when you're wrong and trying to do better. I didn't teach her anything. She taught herself by choosing to change. You showed her a different way to be human. Don't diminish that. Maya came home from her final day at her summer job to find Ethan and Helen deep in conversation. She paused in the doorway, suddenly shy. You must be Maya, Helen said, standing. I've heard so much about you. Mrs. Vance, Charlotte told me you wanted to meet. Only if you're comfortable with that. I know my daughter caused you and your father significant distress, and you have no obligation to be gracious about it. Maya glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragement. She came into the room and sat down. Charlotte apologized, Maya said carefully, and she's been doing the work to change. That matters to me. I don't think people should be defined by their worst moments. That's very mature of you. My parents raised me to believe in second chances, my dad especially. He's too forgiving sometimes, but I guess that's better than the alternative. Helen laughed. You're exactly as Charlotte described, smart, direct, and wise beyond your years. Your father should be very proud. He cries about it regularly. I do not, Ethan protested. You literally cried this morning when I told you about college. That was justified emotion, not regular crying. They talked for another hour, the conversation easy and warm. Helen asked Maya about her theater program, her career aspirations, her plans for the future. Maya answered with the passionate detail of someone pursuing a dream, and Ethan watched his daughter shine, grateful beyond measure that she'd survived the chaos of the past year with her optimism intact. Before Helen left, she pulled an envelope from her purse and handed it to Maya. This is from Charlotte and me, for your college expenses. Books, supplies, whatever you need. Maya opened the envelope and her eyes widened. Mrs. Vance, this is way too much. It's exactly enough. Consider it an investment in your future and an apology for the fear we caused. I can't accept this. You can and you will. Your father taught my daughter about grace and second chances. Let us offer you the same. The grace to accept help without pride getting in the way, and a second chance to form an opinion of our family based on our current choices rather than our past mistakes. After Helen left, Maya sat staring at the check, enough to cover her entire first year's expenses beyond tuition. Is this okay? She asked Ethan, accepting money from them. That's your decision. What does your gut tell you? That it's genuine, that they're trying to make amends in the only way they know how. Maya folded the check carefully. I'm going to accept it. Not because we need it, but because refusing it would be about pride, and pride isn't a good enough reason to reject someone's attempt at reconciliation. When did you get so wise? I've had excellent teachers. The weeks before Maya's departure passed too quickly, each day precious and ordinary and tinged with the bittersweet knowledge of impending separation. They had dinners together every evening, took walks through the changing neighborhood, visited Sarah's grave to share the news about college. Ethan took more photos than necessary, trying to capture his daughter's smile, her laugh, the way she moved through the world with such confidence. Charlotte visited the day before Maya left, bringing flowers and a leather-bound journal. For writing down your experiences, Charlotte explained, college is transformative, and you'll want to remember the details. Trust me. Thank you for this and for the money. It's incredibly generous. It's the least I could do after terrorizing your father. Charlotte's smile was rueful. I wanted to tell you something my therapist helped me understand. When I destroyed your shop, I wasn't really attacking your father. I was attacking everything he represented: stability, contentment, the idea that small lives could be meaningful. I was so desperate to prove that my way of living mattered that I tried to destroy evidence of alternative paths. And now? Maya asked. Now I'm learning that there are infinite ways to live a meaningful life, and none of them are inherently better than others. Your father's quiet dedication to his community is just as important as building empires or changing policy. Maybe more important because it's sustainable and human scale and actually makes people's lives better in concrete ways. He'd never say that about himself. I know. That's what makes it true. After Charlotte left, Maya found Ethan in the shop, organizing inventory for the next day. You know what's weird? She said. I actually like her now, Charlotte. She's still awkward and trying too hard sometimes, but she's genuine. She really cares about making things right. People are complicated. They contain multitudes. Is that Shakespeare? Whitman. Your mother used to quote it when I'd try to reduce people to simple categories of good or bad. I miss her. Me too, sweetheart. Every single day. They stood together in the quiet shop, surrounded by flowers and memories, and let themselves feel the grief that would always be there, woven into everything they did. The day Maya left, Ethan drove her to campus in the old truck he'd inherited from his father. The vehicle wheezed and complained on the highway, but it made the journey. They unloaded boxes and bags, set up her dorm room, met her roommate, a cheerful girl from Ohio who played guitar and wanted to study music therapy. When it was time to say goodbye, Ethan held his daughter and felt the full weight of letting go. You're going to do amazing things, he said. I learned from the best. Call me anytime, literally anytime. I will. And Dad? Thank you for everything, for showing me what it means to stand for something, to protect what matters, to treat people with dignity even when they don't deserve it. Those lessons are worth more than any amount of money. Driving home alone, Ethan let himself cry. Not from sadness exactly, but from the profound recognition that he'd done his job. He'd raised a good human, someone who understood value beyond price, who believed in second chances, who moved through the world with kindness and strength in equal measure. Sarah would have been so proud. The shop felt empty when he returned. He'd grown so accustomed to Maya's presence, her music playing upstairs, her voice calling down questions, her friends stopping by after school. The silence was profound, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of Sarah's death. This was different. The silence of possibility, of a chapter ending and a new one beginning. Ethan made dinner, ate alone, and spent the evening organizing his thoughts about the Merchants Association's next initiatives. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Ethan ran the shop, attended association meetings, mentored the younger business owners who were just starting out. Charlotte's nonprofit brought him in as an advisor, asking him to share his experience with other communities facing development pressure. He discovered he was good at it, breaking down complex situations into manageable steps, helping people find their courage and their voice. The construction on Merchants Row continued. By October, the community center was complete, a beautiful space with tall windows and flexible rooms. The Merchants Association organized a grand opening, and over 300 people attended. There were speeches about community resilience, about the power of organizing, about how change could be partnership rather than conquest. Ethan stood at the back of the crowd, uncomfortable with the attention, when Charlotte found him. "You should be up there," she said. "None of this happens without you. None of this happens without all of us. That's the point." Always deflecting credit. It's almost pathological. She smiled.
My mother wants you to know she's hosting Thanksgiving at her house this year, and you're invited. Maya too, if she's home from college.
That's kind of her, but nothing. You don't get to refuse. It's already decided. We're family now, in that weird chosen family way that happens when people survive conflict together. The word family hit Ethan unexpectedly hard. He'd felt so alone since Sarah's death, even with Maya's constant presence. The idea of expanding his circle, of accepting connection with people he'd once considered enemies, felt both terrifying and necessary. Okay, he said. If Maya's home, we'll come. November arrived with cold rain and early darkness. The development project was 60% complete, and Merchants Row was transforming before Ethan's eyes. New businesses were moving in. A cafe run by a young couple who'd trained in Paris, a bookstore that specialized in local authors, a craft brewery that promised to source ingredients from regional farms. They were exactly the kind of businesses the association had advocated for, and their presence was already changing the street's energy. One afternoon, Ethan received a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Cole? This is Dr. Jennifer Park from the National Bone Marrow Registry. We're calling to inform you that you've been matched with another patient in need of donation. Are you still willing to undergo the procedure? Ethan didn't hesitate. Yes. Wonderful. We'll send you the preliminary screening information. The procedure would likely be scheduled for late December if you're a confirmed match. After hanging up, Ethan sat in the quiet shop and thought about cycles and circles, about how one act of generosity had led to another, had transformed his life in ways he couldn't have predicted. Saving Helen had brought Charlotte into his world, had sparked a battle that became a transformation, had taught him lessons about resilience and community and the complicated nature of redemption. Now he had the chance to do it again, to save another stranger's life, to set in motion another chain of consequences he'd never witness. It felt right. It felt like the work he was meant to do. Thanksgiving came cold and bright. Maya made it home from college, full of stories about her classes and new friends and the production of Our Town she was assistant directing. She'd grown in just 3 months, not physically, but in confidence and worldliness. Ethan saw Sarah in every gesture, every laugh. They drove together to Helen's house in Riverside, and Ethan felt his anxiety spike as they pulled up to the elegant colonial. But Charlotte met them at the door with genuine warmth, and Helen hugged them both like family, and the evening unfolded with surprising ease. Dinner was intimate, just the 4 of them and Dr. Morrison, who'd been invited as Charlotte's guest and support. They ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing, Maya's college experiences, Charlotte's nonprofit challenges, Helen's volunteer work at the hospital, Ethan's upcoming bone marrow donation. You're doing it again, Charlotte said when he mentioned the procedure. Saving someone's life without expecting anything in return. It's not heroic, it's just the right thing to do. That's what makes it heroic, Helen said softly. You can't see your own goodness, Mr. Cole. You've normalized compassion and generosity to the point where you think everyone behaves this way. But they don't. You're extraordinary, and you refuse to recognize it. Ethan felt his face flush. Can we talk about something else? Maya laughed. He gets uncomfortable with compliments, always has. Mom used to tell him he was allergic to his own virtues. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Ethan felt the warmth of being seen and valued by people who'd become improbably important to him. Charlotte was right. They were family now, connected not by blood, but by shared struggle and mutual growth. After dinner, while Helen and Dr. Morrison cleaned up, Charlotte asked Ethan to walk with her in the garden. The November air was crisp, and their breath made clouds in the darkness. I wanted to thank you, Charlotte said, for everything. For not destroying me when you had the chance, for showing me a different way to be human, for accepting my mother and me into your life, even after what I did. You've done the work to change. That's not something I gave you. It's something you chose. But you made the choice possible. You could have pressed charges, could have sued me into oblivion, could have used the viral video to ruin my career permanently. Instead, you offered mercy and patience and the belief that I could become someone better. That belief was the foundation everything else was built on. They walked in silence for a while, past dormant flower beds and bare trees, listening to the distant sound of traffic and their own footsteps on the gravel path. Can I ask you something? Charlotte said. What do you want now? Not for your daughter or your shop or the neighborhood, for yourself. What do you want? Ethan considered the question seriously. What did he want? For 3 years, he'd defined himself through survival and responsibility, through work and duty and the needs of others. His own desires had become so buried he'd forgotten they existed. I want to feel alive again, he said finally. Not just going through the motions, not just surviving. I want to wake up excited about the day ahead, to take risks, to be open to possibility. I want to honor Sarah's memory by actually living instead of just existing in her shadow. Then do it. Take the risks. Be open. Let yourself be happy. Easier said than done. Most things are, but you're the man who stood up to predatory developers and won. You're capable of anything. When they returned to the house, Helen was serving pie and coffee in the living room. The warmth and laughter and easy conversation felt like belonging, and Ethan realized with sudden clarity that this was healing. Not forgetting Sarah or moving on from her, but expanding his capacity to love and be loved, to build new connections while honoring old ones. December brought the final phase of construction and the approach of the holidays. The neighborhood was transformed now, Merchants Row lined with decorated storefronts and new businesses opening every week. The old and new had found their balance. Historic buildings preserved and celebrated, modern structures adding vitality and resources. Ethan's bone marrow donation procedure was scheduled for December 15th. Maya came home from college early to be with him, and Charlotte and Helen insisted on being at the hospital despite his protests that it wasn't necessary. The procedure itself was routine. Local anesthesia, a large needle extracting marrow from his hip bone, a few hours of recovery. But when he woke up, he found his small waiting room crowded with people. Maya and Helen and Charlotte, obviously. But also Mr. Kassab and Mrs. Chen and Marcus Chen and half a dozen other neighbors who'd somehow heard about the donation and wanted to show support. This is ridiculous, Ethan said, still groggy from the anesthesia. It's a simple medical procedure. It's you saving another person's life, Mr. Kassab corrected. That's worth witnessing. They stayed through his recovery, trading stories and jokes and keeping the atmosphere light. Ethan felt overwhelmed by the affection, by the evidence that he mattered to these people in ways he'd never fully recognized. He'd spent so long thinking of himself as ordinary, as just a man running a small shop, that he'd missed the impact of his daily choices and consistent kindness. When he was cleared to leave, Charlotte drove him home while Maya sat in the back seat, monitoring him like a worried parent. You know what I realized today, Charlotte said as they navigated the city streets? That you've built something more durable than any development project I ever designed. You've built community, real connections between people who care about each other and show up when it matters. That's the work that endures. I didn't build it alone. No, but you modeled it. You showed everyone what was possible. The holidays passed in a blur of community celebrations and quiet moments. The Merchants Association threw a party in the new community center, and over 500 people attended. The old neighborhood and the new one mingled, finding common ground in shared space and shared purpose. On Christmas Eve, Ethan and Maya visited Sarah's grave, bringing her favorite white roses. I got the lead in the spring production, Maya said, speaking to the headstone. Sarah in the glass menagerie. I know, the irony isn't lost on me, playing a character with the same name. Ethan added his flowers to Maya's bouquet. I'm doing okay, Sarah. Better than okay, actually. I'm learning to live again, to be open to possibilities. You'd be proud of me. Probably also rolling your eyes at how long it took. They stood in comfortable silence, the winter air cold but the sun bright overhead. Grief would always be there, a permanent part of their landscape, but it had softened into something bearable, something that coexisted with joy and hope and forward movement. The new year arrived with unexpected news. The recipient of Ethan's second bone marrow donation sent a letter through the registry thanking him for the gift of continued life. The recipient was a 15-year-old girl from Oregon who loved marine biology and wanted to study ocean conservation. Her mother had included a photo, a smiling teenager with hopeful eyes and a future that now extended beyond the next few months. Ethan put the letter beside the photograph of his shop on the wall, another reminder that small actions rippled outward in ways we could never fully measure or control. He donated marrow twice, had saved 2 lives, had set in motion chains of consequences that would extend far beyond anything he'd ever witness.
It was enough. More than enough. Spring arrived early, bringing warmth and renewal. The development was complete. Merchants Row transformed into something vibrant and alive. Historic character preserved, modern amenities integrated, community thriving. The neighborhood had survived and evolved, had found a way to honor the past while embracing the future. One Saturday morning in March, Ethan was arranging tulips in the shop window when a woman walked in, looking nervous. She was about his age with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "I'm opening the bookstore down the street next month, and I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Rachel." "Ethan." He shook her hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thank you. I've heard so much about you and what you did to save this street. It's inspiring. I just refused to sell my shop. The community did the rest." "That's not what people say. They say you showed everyone that resistance was possible, that standing for something mattered." Rachel glanced around the shop. "This is a beautiful space. The flowers, the history on the walls, the sense of continuity. It's exactly what the neighborhood needed to preserve." They talked for 20 minutes about books and flowers and the challenges of running small businesses. Rachel was recently divorced, starting over in a new city, nervous and excited about her bookstore. Ethan found himself drawn to her warmth, her obvious passion for her work, the way her face lit up when she talked about literature. When she left, she paused at the door. "I'm having an opening party for the bookstore next month. I'd love for you to come." "I'll be there," Ethan said, and meant it. After she left, he stood in the quiet shop and felt something shift inside him. Not forgetting Sarah or betraying her memory, but opening himself to the possibility that life could expand to include new people, new connections, new chapters. Sarah would want this for him. She'd always believed in moving forward, in choosing life over stasis. Maya called that evening, excited about her upcoming performance and full of questions about his day. He told her about Rachel, about the bookstore, about the tentative feeling of interest he hadn't experienced in years. "Dad, that's amazing," Maya said. "You should absolutely go to her party." "I don't know. It feels complicated." "Life is complicated. That's what makes it interesting. Just go, be yourself, see what happens. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility." The weeks that followed felt lighter somehow, as if permission to move forward had lifted a weight Ethan hadn't realized he was carrying. He prepared for the bookstore opening, helped Rachel with some final setup, and found himself looking forward to the event with genuine excitement rather than social obligation. The night of the opening, the bookstore was packed with neighbors and book lovers and curious newcomers. Rachel had created something beautiful: floor-to-ceiling shelves, cozy reading nooks, a coffee bar in the corner, local art on the walls. It felt like a gathering place, a community hub, exactly what Merchants Row needed. Ethan brought flowers, a cheerful spring arrangement of daffodils and irises, and Rachel's face lit up when she saw them. "These are perfect," she said. "Thank you." They talked throughout the evening, conversations interrupted by other guests, but always returning to each other. Rachel was smart and funny and carried her own grief. A marriage that ended badly, dreams that had been deferred, a fresh start that felt both terrifying and necessary. Ethan recognized himself in her story, saw the same determination to build something meaningful from the ruins of what had been lost. When the party wound down, Rachel walked him to the door. "I really enjoyed talking with you tonight," she said. "Would you want to have coffee sometime? As friends, as neighbors, as whatever feels comfortable?" "I'd like that," Ethan said. "I'd like that a lot." Walking home through the transformed neighborhood, past the new businesses and preserved historic buildings, past the community center glowing with life, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years: genuine hope for the future. Not the grim determination to survive, not the obligation to keep going for Maya's sake, but actual excitement about what might come next. The shop was dark when he got home, but he went inside anyway, turning on the lights and looking around at 3 generations of work and love. His grandfather's counter, his father's photographs, his own additions, all of it woven together into something that would outlast him, that would continue serving the community long after he was gone. But that wasn't sad anymore. It was comforting. He was part of something larger than himself, something that connected past and future, that transformed individual lives into collective meaning. His phone buzzed, a text from Charlotte.
Saw you talking to the bookstore owner tonight. She seems lovely. Mom and I approve. He typed back, I don't need your approval. The response came immediately. Yes, you do. We're family. That means we get to be annoyingly invested in your happiness. Ethan smiled and pocketed his phone. Family, community, connection. These were the things that mattered, the things worth fighting for, the things that transformed survival into actual living. Upstairs in his apartment, he found the journal Sarah had kept during her illness, the one where she'd written letters to him and Maya for after she was gone. He'd read it countless times, but tonight he opened to a page he usually skipped, one that hurt too much to revisit. My darling Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're trying to figure out how to keep going. I know you. You'll throw yourself into work, into raising Maya, into being strong for everyone else, while ignoring your own needs. Please don't. Please allow yourself to grieve fully, to fall apart when you need to, and then, when you're ready, to live again. Not just exist, not just survive, but actually live. Take risks. Be open to love. Let yourself be happy without feeling guilty. I'm not asking you to forget me. I'm asking you to honor our love by continuing to believe that life is good, that connection is worth pursuing, that joy is always possible, even in the midst of grief. You gave me the most beautiful life. Now go live one for yourself. I'll be cheering you on from wherever I am. All my love, forever, Sarah. Ethan closed the journal, tears streaming down his face. Not tears of grief this time, but tears of gratitude and release. Sarah had given him permission years ago to move forward, and he was finally ready to accept it. The next morning, he opened the shop at 7, as always. The spring sun filled the space with golden light, and the flowers seemed to glow with inner radiance. Ethan worked steadily, preparing arrangements and serving customers, doing the ordinary work that had sustained him through everything. Around 10, Maya called to check in between classes. How was the party? She asked. Good. Really good. I'm having coffee with Rachel next week. Maya's squeal of delight made him pull the phone away from his ear. Dad, this is amazing. I'm so happy for you. It's just coffee. It's possibility. That's everything. After they hung up, Ethan stood in his shop, 3 generations of work, countless lives touched, a neighborhood preserved and transformed, and felt the full weight of what he'd built. Not through grand gestures or dramatic stands, but through simple consistency and the quiet dignity of showing up every day to do work that mattered. The bell chimed. Helen Vance walked in, elegant as always, carrying a small wrapped package. For you, she said, setting it on the counter. From Charlotte and me. A thank you for changing our lives. Ethan unwrapped it to find a first edition copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, the book Sarah used to quote from. Charlotte remembered you mentioning Whitman, Helen explained. She tracked this down through a rare book dealer. Ethan opened to a random page and found the line Sarah had loved. I am large. I contain multitudes. It's perfect, he managed. Thank you. No thank you. For showing us that redemption is possible, that grace is real, that the small choices we make about who we are and how we treat others actually shape the world. Helen smiled, her eyes bright with tears. You saved my life twice, Mr. Cole. Once with your marrow, and once by teaching my daughter how to be human again. After she left, Ethan stood holding the book and thought about multitudes, the many versions of himself he'd been and would be, the contradictions he contained, the way loss and love coexisted in his heart without canceling each other out. He was grieving and healing, remembering and moving forward, honoring the past and embracing the future. He was all of these things at once, and that was okay. That was human. The day continued in its familiar rhythm. Customers came and went. Flowers were sold and arranged. Life moved forward in small, ordinary moments that accumulated into something extraordinary. And at the center of it all stood Cole's Flowers, a small shop on a transformed street, anchored by 3 generations of quiet work and sustained by the simple belief that some things, dignity, integrity, community, love, matter more than money. The shop would stand there long after Ethan was gone, a testament to the power of refusing to surrender what truly mattered, of choosing principles over profit, of remaining human in a world that constantly pushed toward transaction and efficiency. It was enough. It was everything. And in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by flowers and memory, and the possibility of new beginnings, Ethan Cole smiled and got back to work.